government, number one, test, is a gift of God. Human government is a gift of God. Oh, what a powerful statement. I could dwell on that one for a week alone. It comes from God. Human government itself, not the form of it, but human government itself is a gift of God. And it's fixed, it's immutable. You can't change it, you can't alter it. Human government will always be here. So, human government, civil human government, human civil government, that's a gift of God. What's it for? Well, I'll tell you what it's for: the safety of mankind. It's for happiness. It's for uh, peace rather than chaos, order rather than destruction. It's something good. It keeps mankind from killing one another and destroying one another until the gospel can get out. So human government is very beneficial. It allows the world to go on. And believe me, the world will not end until God says it's ready to end. No man's going to bring the world to an end. No atomic bomb or hydrogen bomb or nitrogen bomb or plutonium bomb or any kind of bomb. Nothing's going to end it. Poisoning the waters, whatever. Whatever men come up with, do not be afraid. The Bible's already told us how the world will end. It's not going to end differently. When God is done, then it's done. And not done yet. Number two, human civil government is part of God's natural order in creation. So it's not only a gift of God, it's a natural gift. Therefore, again, it's fixed and immutable. Men were created to live in communities or societies under some form of civil government. You remember Abraham was an individual, so that's individual government. And then he had a son, Isaac, so he and his wife, they had a son. That's family government. And then he had couple of grandsons. He had, and so now he's got more than a family. He's got a tribe started. And one of his grandsons, Jacob, had 12 kids. Now he's got a real tribe. And there are 12 tribes of tribes. So now it's getting bigger and bigger. So you go from the individual, Abraham, to a family, Abraham and Sarah and Isaac, but he also had other kids too, There was Ishmael and Hagar and Keturah. And he had a lot of things going for him. But anyway, he's a family. And then he becomes tribal. And then the tribes get so big, they become a people. And when they were in Egypt, they were not a nation, they were a people. And they were a people without a land. They had no land. If you don't have a land, you can't be a nation. You can be a people wandering about hither and yon, but you don't have a land. And if you don't have a land, there's no law of that land. So they had no law and they had no land. So they couldn't be a nation. But finally, under Moses, they got out of Egypt because they had to have their own land, not somebody else's land. And then they got the law. Now they had a law, but they were still a people because they hadn't crossed over into the land yet. So now they have individuals, families, tribes, and now they were a people, and now they had a law of that people, but now they had to come into the land to apply that law in a just way in their own land, because otherwise they were wandering around and the Moabites wouldn't let them in and the Girgashites and so on, and they wouldn't let them in. So they had to conquer them, and finally they conquered them and they became a nation. So that's how nations are formed. You go from individuals and families and tribes and peoples until you're finally a nation, and that means you got a whole bunch of cities. Civilization is city. To be civilized is to be a citizen, is to be a city dweller. And so you have to have a whole bunch of cities to make it a nation. You just can't have people wandering about nomadically and so on. It's still not a nation. So when it's a nation, you've got the people, you got the law, you got the land, and you got the Lord. There's some kind of God over that thing who's behind all those laws and institutions and peoples and cities and nations that governs them, that judges them, and that executes justice. So now you see how the little pattern works that God set up. 3, civil government itself is necessary for mankind. Notice the word itself, civil government itself. But the form of civil governance, or the form of governance, is entirely a matter of choice. So God by necessity, when you become ready to be a nation, you have to have some form of civil government. But what form? That's yours. God does not dictate which form. A monarchy, an aristocracy, a democracy, a republic. Which form? Everybody gets to choose according to the genius of the people that you're dealing with. The Americans felt that they did not need a monarchy. That had turned out to be too easily given over to demonic, tyrannic, despotic government, arbitrary rule. And so they didn't want to do that one. An aristocracy, that's the rule of an elite few. They didn't want that one either. They didn't want just a few people that were noble and aristocratic and so on. They didn't want that one either, because they saw that also was in England, where the bishops ruled, and there were nobles and so on and so forth, and the poor peons at the bottom and so on. They didn't have much liberty or freedom, and they wanted to have freedom because they had a natural right to worship God according to the dictates of their conscience. So a lot of people didn't want to go to the Anglican church. There was only one church that was official, the Anglican. And even though they tolerated others, who wants to be tolerated? That's second class. And so on and so forth. So, people just wanted to be free to worship God the way they wanted to worship God, even if they worshiped a snake or a stick. They wanted to be free to do it. Well, England wouldn't let you to, because it's a Christian nation. Even to this day, it's still called a Christian nation. So Americans didn't want to form that kind of government. So they did not choose a monarchy or an aristocracy, and they would never have chosen, not one of the founding fathers could have chosen a democracy. That was the worst of all forms of government. If tyrannies were bad under monarchs and tyrannies were bad under aristocracies, tyrannies are really bad when it's the majority that rules over the minority, the aristocracy, or the individual, the monarchy. So you can have tyranny in all three forms very easily. But a republic, not the kind the Greeks had, where the slaves were excluded and women had no rights and so on, not that kind, but a republic of laws, where you come under all the laws, so you don't have a government of men. That kind of republic. Republic just means res publica. Res publica. So what is a res publica? It means a public thing where everybody's involved, not just a monarch, not just aristocracy, or not just the majority, a democracy, but all the people. So they set up a government with all the people, so that all the people, we the people, all the people could be involved and participate, whether you were rich or poor, whether you're smart or dumb, with male or female, whatever. Now, they didn't allow women to vote in those days for various reasons I won't go into. And they didn't allow the blacks to be any more than 3/5 and all this stuff. So they had some moral problems of their own. But nevertheless, they set up a government of laws which said that revealed law should not be part of the government itself, but it should be free. And no natural law will ever disagree with revealed law. So number one up on the board is revealed law, way at the top. Revealed law and natural law are the same. It's just that revealed law tells you everything exactly, whereas natural law tells it to you generally. So in natural law, you know there's justice, but you don't know exactly what it is, and so on and so forth. So natural law is that which everybody universally agrees with, whereas revealed law is only for a few, those that believe. It's only for those that God has revealed himself to, and they believe and they obey God. Whereas natural law is for everybody. Everybody believes there's a God, and we agree with that, but we worship him differently. So revealed law and natural law are above common law, and common law then was based on revealed law and natural law in England. But they eliminated some of those things. But these are all higher forms of law that any law you make in society ought to be under revealed law, in other words, not go against it, under natural law, which means not go against it, be subordinate to it, be derivative under it. And if you make a law that isn't under those laws, it shouldn't be a law at all. It has no legitimacy. So this higher law gives you the equity for any laws that you create, interpret, or apply. And then after common law, which America adopted right away, America immediately adopted the common law, but excluded certain features of the common law. They adapted it to the American people who were more Protestant and who had a more enlightened view of humanity. And so they got rid of kings, they got rid of entail, they got rid of primogeniture, they got rid of all the aristocracy and nobility stuff. They got rid of all of that, and that's in the Constitution. You can read that. So they declared themselves free to make their own form of government rather than a tyranny like King George or the bishops, the aristocracy of the bishops, or the nobility, or the democracy of France. They didn't want to go in that direction either. They didn't believe that just majority should rule over minorities. How many know that majority can lynch? A majority of the people in town may lynch the guy. Well, then the guy doesn't have much freedom. So America didn't set it up on a democracy, because in a democracy, everybody vote. How many want to lynch George here? Yeah, let's get him. He's no good. How many say, there's no law there. There's no court system. You can't have it because the majority, when they rule, they move like a mob. And they're moved by emotions of the moment and the passion. Yeah, let's kill all the terrorists and so on. That's just mob rule. Let's do this. Let's do that. That's just emotional excess, passion ruling rather than reason. So you have all these forms of government. Now, God sets it up so that there's justice done. That isn't just. One man rule, few people ruling, most of the people ruling. No, let's have all the people rule. So the sovereign for the Americans was all the people, the totality of the people. So they made the king the whole people, the sovereign, under God, the higher sovereign. So they put their laws under revealed law, natural law, common laws adapted, getting rid of all the feudalism in it, all the Christianity and Christendom stuff, get rid of all that stuff, and just went back to nature itself. And they were trying to copy then to be as close as they could to the natural duties, rights, and liberties that everybody should enjoy. Everybody should have a title to enjoy those duties, rights, and liberties that God gave to him. Everybody. And so they set it up to be the most just and enlightened government that ever was on the face of the earth. They had studied all of the ancient governments of Hammurabi and the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Hittites and so on. They studied all those governments. You can read the same books they read. I do. You can know exactly what they were talking about when they did that. They were well acquainted with history. And there are books today that are not as judicious and as powerful as some books that were written in previous years. There are classics that are written in the ancient times or in the medieval times that are still classic today. And the founders read those. And you do well to teach your children those instead of the kind of nonsense that's often in most of the books today, which is self-serving, serving some special interest. And so that's why we call it revision history, revisional history. When you do law, you should have a long-term view. Mankind hasn't changed. Mankind still believes in right and wrong, just and unjust, fair and unfair, right and wrong. They believe in those things. Those things are absolute. They don't change. And, if I live back in the caveman days, whatever that is, if I live back in a primitive society, there's still right and wrong. If I take Og's wife to be mine, that's wrong, and Og may hit me with his club. So Og understood, mine. No, mine. You are little, mine. Boom. And he hits you with a club, and that's the end of that. So he understood property. He understood what was his and what was not his. And he staked it out. He usually put a little rock there or something. You see that rock? Don't cross that rock. And he tells me, this is my bowl, this is my spear, don't touch my knife, and so on. So they believed in property even in a primitive state of caveman nature or jungle nature or desert nature or anything else. Now, I made that up, but my point is simple, that mankind hasn't changed. Safety and happiness are still important. They always have been and always will be. All right? So number 4, the 3 usual forms of civil governance, governance is the blank, are A, one-man rule. What's that? Monarchy. Now, there are many forms of monarchy, but I'm not going to go into them. There's absolute monarchies, relative monarchies, constitutional monarchies, and so on. Forget all that. Just monarchy means one man rules. One man determines what the laws are. One man determines, may not determine what the laws are, like in Persia. Nebuchadnezzar made the laws and could unmake them. But the Persian king, once a law was made, even the Persian king was subject to him. So those are all monarchs, though. And the next guy came along and it's a little different again. So you can have various forms. That's the first form. Second one is the rule of an elite few. What's that called? Aristocracy. The third one is the people ruling, but really, to be accurate, it should say the majority of the people. Majority rule. And everybody thinks that's a sacred thing. And in practice, it's pretty much that way because a lot of people don't vote. How many people voted in this election? Well, not everybody. Probably more than half, but often it's less than half. And a good half of our people just are apathetic. They don't care about it. They could vote, but they're not registered. They don't care to register. They're not even interested. Even if they were registered, they don't vote anyway. So you have a lot of people that just don't believe in exercising their civil duty, and they somehow think dreamingly that it'll all work out. No, it won't. And when you lose your liberty, it's your own fault. And even those that exercise their rights often only take 3 seconds to make a decision. Alice, I like Alice. Okay, and vote for her. And there's no depth to it at all. That was it right there. Bob Jenkins, I don't know him. Rebecca Sampson, I don't know her either. I like girls. Just check it out. So that's the depth of most people's voting. There's no depth to it at all. They haven't read anything. They check with the Star Telegram or whatever. They don't really know and they don't think about it. And sometimes they call up their neighbor or whatever. But there's not a lot of depth of thought on it. And that's why you can win as a president today with just a bunch of sound bites. Because that's all people vote on. Yeah, I don't like George Bush. Okay, I'll vote for the Democrat. Whoever he is, no matter what his program is, they don't really care. And after he's done his 4 years, they'll be sick and tired of him, and they'll vote for a Republican again, no matter who she is or he is. It's just the way the system works. No depth at all. No teachers. No pastors are teaching. No government people are teaching. Nobody wants to teach people anything about civil government. But God does. God does. I believe it's part of the gospel to teach about civil government. It's the part that is universal. But you know what? We're supposed to love every man. And therefore, I have a stake in society. And I believe it has an impact on the church, whether the church is free or not free. Now, I'm going to be happy even if we're unfree, even if the Antichrist rules, even if he's out to get me. I still have a stake in it. And I don't mind suffering. Suffering is part of the deal. But as long as I'm not in prison, I'll talk. And even if I'm in prison, I'll tap. If you take out my tongue, I'll find a way to be happy and to carry out what God has told me to do. 5. However, there is a fourth form of human civil governance which combines certain features of the other three. It's called a republic. I've already explained what that is. A public thing, meaning the entire public. The entire public. Now, many republics didn't include everybody, and we've talked about that. 6, the form of governance that God selected for his own people. So here's interesting. God says there's all these forms, but here's the right one. He's choosing which one is the right one. He doesn't choose a king. Isn't that interesting? That when God chooses a government for his people, it's not a king. And he doesn't choose an aristocracy. And he will not choose a democracy. How many know that in the church, the people don't vote? If they do, like the Baptists do, that's evil. You're not going to come up with a stable church. All the people voting against some of the people, that's not a church. because then you're always going to have a minority that's disgruntled, or an individual that has to leave or has to stay and be oppressed. So, no, God is never into democracy, nor monarchy, the pastor ruling or the pope ruling, nor an aristocracy, all the cardinals, or a council of cardinals. No, he's not into any of those. He's into a commonwealth. He's into a commonwealth. A commonwealth means the people rule. And if you'll notice carefully in the Old Testament, you couldn't even have King David unless the people consented. All the people had to consent to him. And when half of the nation did not consent, all the northern tribes, we have nothing in David. They didn't submit to King David for 13 years until something happened. And then they did. But David had to win them over. He could not just say, look, God made me king, so you have to obey me. No, the people had to consent to be governed. And he had to prove that he cared for them as a shepherd cares for the sheep, and that he wanted their safety and happiness. And then they said, okay, we want David to be our king. 7. When the I didn't do 6. The form of governance that God selected for his own people under Moses, when it was time for Israel to become a nation, was a republic, or a commonwealth of laws. A republic is the same as a commonwealth. Commonwealth, common weal. The wheel is the wealth. Woe and weal. Woe means curse. You're in trouble, oppressed. Weal means wealth or happiness, or everybody's winning. Everybody's safe and happy. And so, does a government give you wealth, or does it give you woe? When it's woe, it's a despotism. When it's wealth and weal, and that which is good and beneficial, then you've got a commonwealth. Common to all men. Everybody in society is happy then. Now, that doesn't include the criminal, because he's lawless. It doesn't include a whole bunch of people that, for whatever reason, are not part of the free society. But everybody that wants to be under the law and wants to be free in that society is included. So you do exclude certain individuals who have chosen to exclude themselves, and we hold them morally responsible. We don't say, oh, it's because he was brought up in the neighborhood. That's what liberals say. We say every man is right in his own eyes, but he better decide to find out what God says and live according to natural justice, natural duty, natural right, natural liberty. Otherwise, he loses it. That's what society is all about, whether you like it or not. For example, the homosexual community may think they're going to get something out of Obama because he promised them. Won't happen. Now, Nancy Pelosi and others will try to win those things over and hope that after 8 years of frustration under awful George Bush, that they're going to get, they're going to pay back certain people. It won't happen. I mean, no matter what it comes up with, I'm just going to tell you, it'll be rejected. It will not work. So, you know why? Because there's a God. Because there's a God, and you and I aren't finished. Otherwise, the whole thing come to an end. The Antichrist would rule and be over, and that could happen too. But it's not going to happen. I'll tell you why. Because we ain't ready. I can just tell you, we are not ready. We are not ready. This is a warning. It's a warning, but it's not the end. It's the beginning of sorrows, but it's not the end. And a lot of good things will happen too. But you aren't in an Antichrist situation until you are, and you're not. So therefore, rejoice. Therefore, get excited, because it isn't over yet. And you're the one being tested right now, not the liberals. They're being tested too, but you're the ones being tested. Why did you want liberty? And why didn't you unite? And why didn't you become active? And why didn't you care? So you're the ones that are saying, don't you care about your religious duty, your moral duty, and your civil duty? You better, because the whole world is waiting upon it. They won't become Christians if you just ignore one of the three. You've got to do all three. Those three duties are necessary. You have a duty, therefore you have a right to do that duty, therefore you have a liberty to do that. And if you give up the liberty, you've given up the right, and you can't do the duty. Did you see what I just did? So if I were the only man alive, it'd be enough, because I insist upon obeying God. Because I do, I'm willing to die for it. Because I do, then I have a right to do it, because God gave it to me. The government may not give it to me. The criminal may not give it to me. I don't need it from him. I need it only from God. Therefore, I have a liberty to do it. But if I use my liberty, the criminal will kill me. or the government will, punish me. That's okay. I'm not afraid of that. But once a man is free, he's free indeed. If the Son shall set you free, you shall be free indeed. So you don't fear man, you fear God. When it comes to the conflict, I'll go with God. It's better to obey God, Acts 5:29, than man. So all of man, and in this government, and it hasn't been overthrown yet, by the way, this government says that, it's better to obey God is upheld. So that's upheld. I have the freedom to worship God, and I do it. Okay, 7. When the founding fathers who set up a form of civil governance, our founding fathers, Texas, same, for this country, they decided that the best form of civil governance for a free people who wanted to be wise, virtuous, and happy would be a republic of laws, not a government of men. So they didn't want a government of men like monarchs, aristocracies, and democracies. Those are just human governments, not under God's law. They're not under those higher laws that I was talking about. Revealed law, natural law, common law, declaration, constitution, bills of rights. Those are all higher laws. So after you get rid of those 6, then you can make what's called positive law, 7. But those will be oppressive if you don't have the equity of the top 6. So there is equity in those top 6. And the top one is top. So 1 governs 2, governs 3, governs 4, governs 5, governs 6, and that governs 7. So 7 is always to be derivative of the Constitution, which always has to obey the Bill of Rights, which, though it came after it, actually was before it. And the Constitution would not have been accepted unless the Bill of Rights was promised. And so, actually, you have this line of laws all standing over and governing the one below it. But you see at the top, there's only one God, and there's only one law, God's law. And it doesn't matter. And that's why men today, to be free from God, which means licentious, lawless, they have to get rid of those 6 things. That's exactly what they've done. And when I was involved actively, I followed those 6. Because I followed them, I got in trouble with all kinds of people, not just the bad guys, but also the good guys. I got in trouble because they didn't want to follow those 6. They wanted to follow some of them, some of the time. I wanted to follow all of them, all the time. And this is the way actually real judges in real situations judge. So if there's a good judge in town, he has to follow all 6. So before he can make 7 and then make an adjudication on that statute or that municipal ordinance or that federal law, he has to first of all visit, look to, think about those other 6, apart from which there can be no true interpretation or no justice done on earth. And we still believe in justice and liberty for all, right? One nation under God. If the nation isn't under God, you're under the devil. You're either going to be under God or under the devil, period, over out. All right. Did I finish that one? When the founders set up, they decided the best form would be for civil governments would be a republic of laws. 8, the American founders got their ideas. Listen carefully now, because you're not going to read this in books. Not from the Greeks and the Romans. They didn't get their ideas primarily from them. That means it's secondarily. They got some ideas from them, but they criticized them all over the map also. But from the Old Testament law under Moses. Did you know that? Of all the quotes from the founders, Locke is big, and Montesquieu is big, and, so on and so forth. Algernon Sidney, whom I've read, but most people haven't read. All of these, the founders all read them. They were very well acquainted with them, so I've read them. Aristotle, Cicero, and so on and so forth. You have to know what Plato said. You have to know what all those things are. And most people aren't educated anymore, but the founders were. It's amazing. It's amazing how the founders studied. They didn't have the computer. They didn't have, all the stuff we have today, all the multitudes of books and knowledge. But they also had much more wisdom than we do, because the few books that they did have were well written and deserved to be published only because they deserved to be published, because learned people would read them and would be able to compare them with others. Today, people have no clue as to what's right and wrong and wise and foolish. So you just read books to basically professors at Yale, where I went, professors at Yale, it's either publish or perish. If you don't write something, you're fired. So you had to keep up. There's no tenure. You have to keep up the publishing. And so they have to write a book every few years. And so a lot of what they write is just nonsense, because somebody has to write something. Otherwise, you're going to perish. So they write something. That doesn't mean they're not bad. If they are bad, it might be good. But a lot of it's just pressure put on you, not to do what you really want to do, but to do what money dictates. So a lot of stuff that's out there is just rubbish. In other words, it's a book about a book about a book about a book about. It's not really about substance. It's just a book about what other people have said and your little take on that. I could write thousands of those books. I could write books on, Nietzsche, Aristotle, whatever, and sell all books. I could be famous just simply criticizing everybody else and never get to the substance of the issue itself. Just simply writing that, well, Aristotle doesn't agree with Cicero, and Cicero doesn't agree with Luther, and Luther doesn't agree with, Montesquieu, and so on. So I could write all kinds of books on that and be famous. It's so easy. I could destroy evolution. I could destroy Freud. I could take on all of the Marxists and so on and so forth, and it'd be easy for me to do it. I have the training for it. I have the library for it. I have the knowledge of it. But you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. So let's read on. And from the New Testament, 8, gospel under Jesus. So what did they borrow from Jesus? Well, Jesus wasn't in the law, he was into the gospel. But they did borrow equity from Jesus, because he came, and that's why in the Constitution it says law and equity. The law comes from Moses, but the equity doesn't come from Moses. The equity comes from Jesus, the Messiah. And remember, Moses, who wrote the law, said, another prophet God will raise up. Listen to him. That's equity. Aaron was equity, but he was the type and shadow of the real guy, the Messiah. Yeshua HaMashiach. So Jesus, the Messiah, is Jesus Christ. Christ is the Greek word Christos for Mashiach. So Jesus Christ, he's the Messiah. And who he is was important to the Jewish people. Who is he? They knew that the Messiah was coming, but they didn't know it was Jesus, and they killed him because they made a big mistake there. They thought that Jesus was going to underdo the law. No, he said, I didn't come to underdo the law. I didn't come to violate it or destroy it. I came actually to fulfill it, make it possible. When law doesn't serve justice, it's not law. It may be a legal law, but it's not a lawful law. So law must often be, but not always, must often be joined with, visit with, call into equity in order to make that law read right for justice, to do and accomplish justice. So law plus equity equals justice. But sometimes law alone, without equity, you don't need to visit equity because the law itself is just. And to prove that, men use it over and over and over again, and it works. So there's a pragmatic or a long-term custom that says, this is held in our community or in our nation or in our world for many, many years. Therefore, it's settled. It's something settled. Well, that is precedent. That is something where you're looking back over 1,000 years, not just, 2 years or 15 years or even 100 years. It should have a long-standing precedent, not just it's been settled in the last 5 administrations. That means nothing. That's nothing compared to the history of law. So all laws should come under those 6 higher laws: revealed, natural, common, Declaration, Constitution, Bill of Rights. Those 6 laws are the equity for which you read any ordinance, you read any statute, you read any law of the federal government. You have to judge by those laws. And if a statute, federal, state, or local, if any statute or ordinance or law is not subordinate to and derivative of those higher laws, it's not law at all. Eo ipso. Eo ipso, it is not a law. Why? Because that means automatically it's not a law. Because it's nullus and void. It's null and void. It can't be a law because it has no legitimacy to it. Laws are not just power, words under power, words that empower somebody to do something. They have to be right. And so they have to agree with justice, reason, morality. They have to agree with those higher laws that God has revealed. There's a normative substance to the order of the universe. In other words, I know you won't understand what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it. The axiological, which means how a thing is valued or weighed or has meaning. The axiological is more important than even the epistemological, which figures out what's right and wrong. It's got to know there is a right and wrong. So there's the problem, because man's reason, epistemologically, is limited. So when he goes to establish his set of laws, if you were a positive law person, number 7 only, then you have a ontology, that is how things are, being itself. You have an ontology that you assume you know what's right and wrong, but you don't. And so it'll just be a despotism. There's no difference between a despotism and a just law if you have an epistemological problem about what's right and wrong. So the universe itself, otherwise God cannot hold us responsible. Therefore, you could not be free. If you're not free, you can't be responsible. If there's a law like gravity and you jump off the roof of the building and fall on the ground, you can't be responsible for the law of gravity. But you can be responsible for jumping off. So you're held responsible because you're a free person. Because there is no law of gravity that tells you you have to do this or you have to do that. You can't be held responsible for a law that you can't break. If you can't break the law, like gravity, then you can't be held responsible. You can only be held responsible if the law could be broken. Don't eat of this tree. That's how God made us responsible, right there. The minute he said don't, right there you had a law that made you free. So that law actually made you free. The duty created the right, which created or necessitated that liberty. So this whole thing of law is theologically potent, very interesting to me. So human laws are related indirectly to divine laws. Because if I'm not a self-governing individual under God and morally related to my neighbor, then I'm not going to be able to keep the laws of society. So society's laws hold only if they agree with the axiology, that is the value system, that is that there's a normative order to the universe naturally that can't be changed, that's fixed and immutable. If that's not true, then a judge can just say anything he wants to say. Maybe you're his brother-in-law and you're Sarah Palin and you just, make him lose his job because you don't like him because he divorced your sister. That would be arbitrary. So they had to examine that to see whether she was a just judge, whether she actually executed or applied that law in a correct fashion. And so it's claimed that she did fine. She didn't mislike him, but nobody knows that ultimately. But they came up with that conclusion. So perhaps he was a rotten person. Perhaps he wasn't. Doesn't make any difference. The law is now settled on that. So she was vindicated. But where you see, natural man reason, epistemology, is limited because you can never know for sure. Everything you come up with that's reasonable, you can come up with another opposite that is opposite to that, and they're both reasonable. That's the problem with man. That's why you need revelation. Because revelation says, even though it's written on your heart naturally that there is a God, you don't know who he is, and you don't have any final way to adjudicate, to say what's right and wrong. Well, then that's why he gave it to Moses and said, here's what's right and wrong. You shall love God with all your heart and soul and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. Okay, there it is. Now it's all laid out. Now, all laws then should agree with that. And if they don't, they're not going to be just laws. And the way you can find out, try it. See what happens when you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, how far you get. See how it works. See whether there's common good in your society. We're a bad society today because we have lost our mooring. We no longer teleologically, that is, in view of the end, the purpose for which God created the world normatively, why being is ontologically, and what you can know about that epistemologically. Because of that, we are now confused today, because we don't know where we are, because we don't have this higher law operating. Beautiful, simple, powerful, as old as the hills, nothing new under the sun. 9, the kind of civil government they envisioned for our country was a government of liberty under law. Liberty, law. The idea of law, 10, is to appoint a public sword to restrain evil in society. So when you come into society out of a state of nature, remember in a state of nature you have two things. You have your religious duty and your moral duty. George Washington said that all of our political felicity is related to a prior and higher religion and morals. Farewell address, 1796. When he quit as president, that's what he told them. And that's the most powerful address. I've almost memorized it. That is so powerful what he said. Of all the, duties and dispositions and so on. He said religion and morality. Those are the two pillars of our society for a felicitous, for a happy, for a workable, practical, political house. It should be built on a foundation. Those two props of human happiness are religion and morality. And he said, don't think you can have morality without religion. Like the French. He was talking about the French. It was at the height of the French Revolution. And so he was saying, no matter what refined minds may come up with, you cannot have morality without religion. So he laid it out. There are two props, but one of them is higher than the other. One of them is stronger, more basic than even the other. So you have religion in the deepest, then you have the morality that comes from that, then you have civil government on top of that. Those are the three duties I told you about. George Washington understood it perfectly, and no one disagreed. So, number 10, the idea of law is to appoint a public sword to restrain evil in society and to punish all those who are determined to break the laws and do the evil. So when the laws say, thou shalt not, they punish you if you do. So you're morally free. That's why liberty is essential. You can't be responsible if you're not free. This government was built for a self-governing people. Monarchy is built for people that won't govern themselves. When you have a heavy government, like we do now, you have a heavy government because you won't govern yourselves. Since you won't take care of yourselves, you won't take care of your neighbors, you're not the right kind of person, you have a heavy government. So it isn't because the bad guys took over, it's because the good guys aren't good. And you have to admit that. No, I worried more about my television set and my boat than I did about God and the kingdom and anything else. If I had sought first the kingdom, he would have given me. He would have given me a good society, a strong economy, and he would have given me a political, stable universe to live in. But you neglected that. You don't even care about it. You just sent your kids to school as though school could do a good job of schooling. How foolish. As though a hospital could get you well. How foolish. I'm telling you, every mistake you make is because you disobeyed God. You did not fear God. And the church is not the church. The greatest evil in our society is that pastors are muzzled. They're silent. They either don't know and won't tell, or they do know and are afraid, intimidated, and bribed. So we don't have men anymore. We don't have real men that will stand up and stand for truth. And those that do will be harmed and hurt and persecuted. Yahoo! It better be good news to you, because you're not a trustee otherwise of the things of God, and you're not a steward or a witness to caring about your fellow man and showing in society. Now, it's going to be proven in society what kind of church we have. The kind of people that are leading today, Obama's kind of church background is, he's a Christian and he's open to all kinds of religions, and he's just a hodgepodge of things. Well, that's his background. That's his theological background. Hey, let's all get along. All religions should get along. Christians shouldn't be favored by any means. They should just be one of a bunch. Well, you see, that was not the way the founders felt at all. They allowed all religions, and they didn't make any civil penalty for being non-Christian, but they wanted full freedom for the Christians. Obama cannot guarantee you that, nor will he. He will come up with some kind of generalized, blurry, universal, natural religion. Now, George Washington could speak about providence ruling, the natural architect of the universe. That was his language as a president. But his personal views, unlike Obama's, he loved Jesus, and he prayed to Jesus every single day. We even have his prayers. We know exactly what he prayed, because he kept it in his breast at all times. He'd pull it out every day. And you can pray the exact prayer that George Washington prayed every single day of his life. And he was a dedicated Christian, but he never mentioned Jesus in public discourse. There, he was everybody's president. So, but I'm afraid you're going to have trouble in our world today, because we have some kind of a blurry thing that's going to fit everybody, and then you don't give any freedom to Christians. So that equality will eliminate that liberty. Right now, you still have it, but it may disappear because you didn't use it. It's your own fault. I won't blame anybody for doing it. We embarrassed ourselves. We were not true. The pastors sold out. They betrayed us. Churches have not held to the old paths. They've not held to the truth, and they didn't believe it. They believed in materialism. Mammon has conquered us. You have to admit that mammon has conquered us. So if you're free, you shall be free indeed. So we're teaching people, get free from all that. That was the original thing that gave us what we originally had, and now we've lost it. We're a minority. We are a small minority, and you will be persecuted. You will be. You cannot just say, oh, I hope it all goes back. It won't go back. Somebody's going to have to die for this. Somebody's going to have to pay for this. Amen? This is exciting, isn't it? Yeah, it's exciting. Very good. All right. The idea of law, number 10, is to appoint a public sword to restrain evil and to punish those that do it. Good government, 11, is possible for any society. Good government is possible, not just for Christians, but for any society. In Romans 13:1, we read, let every soul, pasa suke, let every soul, every pasa, soul, psuke, let every soul, it doesn't say every body, it doesn't say every spirit. This is not for your spirit. This is not for your body. You're not subject in your body or subject in your, it says soul. So now, to what extent is my soul given to God, and to what extent do I render to Caesar? Now you're going to find out exactly to what extent. Let every soul be subject to the higher authorities. I just pointed them out, didn't I? You see all these 6 things above 7? So a higher authority is not just the guy that has a gun that says, I have power, give me your money. Yeah, but you have no law, you have no authority, you have no legitimacy. So I may give it to him because he has a gun held over my head. But that is arbitrary power, that's despotism, that's crime. So he's going to do a crime toward me because I won't give him my wallet. And by the way, I've been in that situation, and I didn't give my wallet, and they had a knife to my throat. Say, if you don't give me what's in your wallet, I'm going to slit your throat. I said, well, I'm not going to give it to you. Do you have money in your wallet? Yes. Are you going to give it to me? No. And the guy in the car said, slit his throat. And the guy in the back seat had a crowbar. Let's get him and take it. But I said, I'm so glad you guys have come along because I need to confess some sin to you. And I began talking to him. He has this knife right to my throat. It's right over here in Monty's neighborhood. And as I was telling them the gospel and asking their forgiveness, because they had driven by me before, I was parked there praying. They had driven by me, and I saw them pull around, and the Lord immediately told me they're on drugs. You know, they're all naked and whatnot, and so on and so forth. And they're going to come back. I watched them come back, and they stopped and they said, "Do you have any money?" Yes. Could we have your money? No. So that's how it started out. Then they drove away and came back, and I saw them do it, and I realized when they left, I realized I lied to them because they said, "What are you doing?" And I didn't want to say it. I was praying, so I didn't say. And the Lord smote me and said, "You should have witnessed to him." So when they came back, that's what I was doing. So when they said, "Give me your money," and all, I said, "No." I said, "But I'm glad you guys have come back because I wanted to ask your forgiveness for not sharing Jesus with you." I'm telling you, these guys were all doped up and everything. That's why they said, "Hit him, get it, hurry up." And a car came. I just, didn't have any hope at all. But a car came up from Randall Mill Road. A car came up from Randall Mill Road, and all of a sudden they pulled away. Now, I was driving a Volkswagen. They had a real car. It was just a little Volkswagen, so there's no way I could catch them or whatever. But a couple of years later, one of the boys, I recognized the guys because they were just guys. One of the guys, his mother began attending my church, and so I went and visited her in that same neighborhood, very close to where your dad's house is. And the guy was there, and I recognized him. And of course, he may or may not have recognized me, but his mother now is part of the church. It was great. So I got to witness and commend the boy and all this kind of stuff. It was great. So you never know what God's going to do. But of course, he didn't want to kill me, and that's a pretty risky thing for a few bucks, just to have another high. But you see, you don't think right. And when there's three of them, and they were anxious, So there you have it. But only God can get you out of that. And God commanded me to witness to him, and I did. I did it. I was faithful. Well, only God can protect you in such a situation. I would not recommend driving on that road again. And I've never prayed there again. I won't even go back to that neighborhood. I don't like that neighborhood. So God is good. God is good. So the idea of law is to punish bad people. Good government is possible, however, for any society. Let every soul be subject to the higher authorities, plural. So that means more than one. It's not just a king, but it's all authorities, plural. For there is no authority, singular, except that which is under God. Isn't that interesting? There's no authority of anybody unless you're under God. Peggy does not obey me or submit to me, even though the Bible says to, unless I'm first submitted to God. And I've told her that. You don't submit to me as a person. You submit to the office I hold under God, because there is no authority. There's no legitimacy. There's only tyranny if I'm not under God. And the same with the church. I don't want anyone to obey or do what I say. I want you to go and check it out. Check out everything I say. See if it's not in the Bible. See if you can't understand it in your own terms. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to know anything. You can just go and read it yourself and say, Jesus, show me if what that person just said is true. And you are free. And you must do it. It's a duty as well to test every spirit to see whether it be of God. So it's not hard for me to do my job. All I have to do is be faithful to God as I understand it. And even if I'm wrong, it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility. So I think he was wrong. Okay, that's your responsibility. I'm not going to be mad at you for doing that. I will not, be angry at somebody for doing that. That's good. And I've told Peggy, do it. When you see me doing something that you don't think is right, don't do what I say. Defy me. Even if I punish you, defy me anyway. So, because I'm wrong. So, you have to obey what you think God has told you to do. You're not going to answer to me someday. You're going to answer to God. And even though I'm a pastor, that doesn't mean I'm always doing a good job. Sometimes I'm just Jim. How many know you can slip into your old person from time to time? Has anyone ever done that? You're a Christian, but sometimes you're not very Christian in your Christianity. Come on, this happens every day. It happens every day. But that's all right. That's forgivable. But that's why you got to be humble about this thing. Even though I'm a Christian, everything I do isn't Christian. A lot of what I do has to be repented of on a daily basis. Anyway, for there is no authority except that which is under God. We are a nation under God. And the authorities, plural, that means legislators, judges, executive people, all kinds of authorities. Federal, state, municipal, all kinds of authorities. The authorities, the higher authorities, that are existing under God are the ones which have been ordained by Him. So it isn't the person that fills the office, it's the office itself that's ordained. And the person that fulfills that office, the rulers, are subject to God, even if they disobey at times. And I can object to what they do, and I do. I do actually do this. I object to authorities that aren't doing the job according not just to the statute, but according to the Constitution that statute is under, and according to the natural law that Constitution is under, and so on and so forth. So I object, and I tell them my objection, and I tell them the basis of my objection. It's not only God's law, it's also natural law, it's also common law, it's also the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Therefore, I'm not going to do it. I won't obey you, or your interpretation, or your application of your interpretation of that law. So that's a system that's set up for civil government. You see how it works? So you really have a lot of power. I'm telling you, as an individual subject to, you actually have tremendous power. Let's say it was a criminal. Said, I'm going to, I'll give a better example. Let's say you're in the army, and you have a sergeant, and he tells you, let's not do what Eisenhower said. Let's go to Paris instead. I think it's going to be kind of rough in Rome. Let's not go there. Or whoever went there, Patton, whoever it was. It was Patton. Whoever went there. Okay. Now, your sergeant, who's your immediate supervisor, your immediate power, he said, if you don't come to Paris with me and the other guys, we're all going to go. We're not going to follow the supreme commander. You go with us, because it's going to be a lot of fun in Paris. And if you don't, I'll beat the tar out of you. We all will, because we don't want you to stay behind. Well, am I going to obey him, or am I going to obey my conscience, or am I going to obey God, or am I going to obey the commander? I mean, who am I going to obey? Well, be subject to the higher authorities. It goes all the way up to God. I'm going to be subject to that. And the higher authorities have no authority unless they're under God. So, therefore, I'm going to be beat up. Now, will I choose then to obey the Eisenhower or Patton or whoever it is? Or will I, and this guy can get away with a lot because, he may kill me even. He may beat me to such a degree, and this has happened, that I die. So I'm going to appeal to him. Here's what I'll say to the guy. Look, you may beat me because you're, stronger than I am and you have a certain amount of authority, but I'm telling you, I don't recognize your authority in telling me to do something that's evil. And what you're telling me is evil, and I'm going to get a report to the supreme commander. This thing will come out. Now all the guys are listening. So, and now he's nervous because I said those words, and I put him on notice, but everybody else heard it, and he knows, if I ever do anything wrong with one of these other guys, they may tell on me too, and I'd have to kill all of them. And you're going to get caught sooner or later. So it's not as easy a thing to just dominate an individual. There's power. And I can keep appealing on up until I reach justice or until I reach some form of rough justice. Well, so you never know. And you can defy a whole institution. You can defy a nation. You can defy the world when you're standing under God. Jesus did. And I have. And I will continue to do it because right is right and wrong is wrong. and everybody knows it. And there is a God that'll back you up. When you are like that and you're raped out in the middle of a field, there's no one to cry to. So you can't cry. Well, you can cry, but it's useless. And the Bible says, in that case, you're not guilty. But if you're in the city and someone starts raping you, cry out. Do not submit. Run away if you can. Because there, it's a different deal. And you're guilty if you don't cry out and run away and do whatever you have to do. Do you see what I'm saying? That's justice. And so, as a self-governing individual, you're making decisions all the time is what is right and what is wrong under the higher authorities. 12. Whosoever therefore is the one opposing the authority. Oh, did I say ordained by him?
Yes.
Okay. Whosoever therefore is the one or opposing the authority, the human authority, is opposing the ordinance, that is the orderly arrangement of God. To oppose the king or to oppose the magistrate or the judge or anyone else, you're actually opposing God, unless they're not under God. In that case, you have to tell them they're not. And they that have opposed themselves to that authority shall receive to themselves temporal judgment, not to mention eternal. 13. For civil rulers are not a terror to good works, but only to evil. And do you wish not to be afraid of the authority? Then you must do what is good, and you will have praise from it. So now, you see how the Bible defines what government does. Government can never be a terror to good. It can only be a terror to bad. And so therefore, I can submit to my husband when he's good, but I don't submit when he's bad. I can submit to my pastor when he's doing right, but I don't submit when he's doing wrong. That means I'm self-governing. I am the one responsible for my unhappiness. I'm the one responsible for my life. God will hold you accountable. So even that bad king needs to have me tell him so. Though I'm his way down the line. I don't have the power. He has the power. How many know government has a lot of power today? Tremendous power. They have satellites up and they can read your mail and everything. They know what's going on. So they have a lot of power over you. They can come and make deals with you because they know certain things that you didn't know they knew. They know all about your patterns and everything. They have a lot of knowledge. It's evil. Nevertheless, they have it. Well, so now you're under a tyranny again because they can tyrannize you at any time. And they know stuff that you don't know that they know. Why do they know that? Because they have these super computers and all kinds of information, and they got cameras everywhere, and they got things looking down on you, and they want to control you. They would like to control your soul as well as your body. And it's against the law, but still, they have now number 7 up here, little ordinances locally. They have cameras everywhere and so on. It's Big Brother. It's just watching over you and tyrannizing you. And believe me, if there's a possibility of them using that stuff against you, they will. So the temptation is right there, and they'll fall for it. Someone, sooner or later, will want to get even. 14. For he, the civil ruler, is a minister. Did you know that a judge is a minister? But the word for minister here is servant or deacon. Diakono. So the minister is actually not a pastor like myself, but is actually a servant like a deacon or a deaconess. So President Bush and now President-elect Obama is my servant. They're a deacon appointed by God, under God, to bless me, protect me, as long as I don't break the law. But do they do it? No. They don't always do it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So it all depends on all kinds of factors. So they have to be self-governing. Let's hope that he's a better person than the people that elected him, because some of the people that elected him, I heard him saying on television, good, we don't have to have insurance anymore. We don't have to even pay our bills because he's going to be president and everything's guaranteed. We get a college education. Everything's going to be free now. See? And that is an attitude that people have, is, I'll never lose my house now. That's why I'm going to vote for him. I heard people say that. So, and don't think that's rare. That's common. People believe that someone who makes all those big promises means them. And since he made them all just to get the vote, though he's a pragmatist, and when he's got the vote, all bets are off. But anyway, people don't know that. And so all the people that relied upon him to carry forth their agenda, they will be shocked and surprised that he lives in Hyde Park. He may be a community organizer down in the slums, but he lives in Hyde Park. In other words, he's a pragmatist. He only is utopian and, caring for everybody to get the vote base. He didn't really help people. He wasn't really, trying to help so many people. He was really thinking of himself to advance himself. That's why he didn't take a Harvard law degree and then go out and work for some Harvard firm. He decided to go into the streets of Chicago, not because he's so wonderful and kind and friendly, but because he's evil and wicked and selfish, just like I would be. That's Chicago. That's the way. He's a fellow Chicagoan, just like me. And so that's what I would do too. Until I met Jesus, that's exactly what I would do. And I did it. I would use anything in the world to promote my own agenda without conscience, without any at all, any kind of like feel bad for. Oh, I never felt bad for people. You see, I only felt good about myself, get myself going. But when I met Jesus, all of a sudden, I realized I was wrong. That devastated me. Well, the law is meant to restrain evil and then to punish those that do evil, but only civil evil. The moral law is handled by God and by the people. And the people will punish you if you do an immoral thing. But God is the one that will punish me, and he alone, for religious untruth. That's the one right there. But it's God behind all three. The reason I obey Caesar is, he said, render to Caesar. That's why I obey Caesar. I don't obey Caesar because Caesar has a gun. I don't obey Caesar because he has all the laws above him. I obey Caesar because God said, you do it. So revealed law is behind the natural law, is behind the common law, is behind the Declaration, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and hopefully behind then those statutes. For he, the civil ruler, is a minister of God to you for the good. But if you do evil, be afraid, because he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is a minister, a deacon of God, and an avenger to give wrath to the one who is practicing evil. Isn't that interesting? That a judge actually is executing God's wrath. I had a judge say to me the other day, I never thought of myself as exercising the wrath of God on bad people. She was a woman judge, and she thought that was great. What a great idea. I'm the executor of the wrath of God. And being a Christian, she understood then, I never thought about that. That's what I'm doing. So, yeah, for he, the civil ruler, is a minister of God to you for good, but if you do evil, be afraid, because he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is a minister and an avenger to give wrath to the one who is practicing evil. So that's God. God could do it directly, but he doesn't. He uses his ministers to do it, his deacons. Just like in the church, he could govern you directly, but he wants to use Pastor Jim and Pastor David, so on and so forth. And there are other pastors in our church besides us. We just haven't laid hands on them yet. And there are other deacons and so on. Well, and there are other women that are teaching and exercising authority already, but we just didn't lay hands on them and say publicly, this is the person. But they're growing up among us so that people say, oh yeah, I listen to him or her and I hear God. It's powerful. That's how ministry is done, not just don't quickly lay hands on people, but watch that the people also say, yeah, that was helpful. 15, therefore it's necessary for every soul to be subject, not only because of the ruler's temporal wrath, but also because of the inward conscience. So the rest of the world only has wrath that they care about. The only reason they obey the law is not because they want to. It's because they're afraid of going to jail or being fined or some punishment, some penalty. Instead of a reward, they get a penalty, or their reward is rendered to them as a penalty. But we, as Christians, we obey for two reasons. Not only because of fear of God's wrath for doing evil, but also because of conscience. And your conscience, and I'll tell you, this is true in my case now. I didn't know I had a conscience until I got one, but I had it all along, but I just didn't know about it. I never heard it. But now my conscience is loud. It makes too much noise. Quiet. I can hardly sin with you talking up all the time. I'm not having any fun sinning like I used to either. So that conscience ruined my capacity to be ruthless. I no longer can be ruthless. I was cruel, cold, nasty, evil, and lied without nothing for me to lie, nothing for me to deceive, cheat, steal, and it's just easy. Now I can't do it anymore. I have a conscience. Is that true, Debbie? You have that now too? Yeah. I mean, it's awful because I used to do things that, were conscienceless, sinful. But it's no fun anymore because I got this voice always. God, leave me alone. How can I sin? I just want to eat one more pecan sandy. That's all. I mean, why is my conscience bothering me? And it does, because it knows if I eat one more, I'll eat the whole package. That'll be a pound of butter. And that is not good for the human system. And it punishes me big time. I wonder, what's wrong with me? You ate all that cake or cookie or whatever the thing is. So, all right. 15, 16. Every soul is commanded by God, so you're under God's law, including Christians, to be subject to God's civil minister. Every soul. You are under the magistrate, whether he be a legislative magistrate, a judicial magistrate, an executive magistrate. You are under the political magistrate of whatever stripe he is, by God. 17. You say, well, what if the guy's a tyrant? Well, even the tyrant who has the power over you, you got to be careful of him. Adolf Hitler was a bad guy, but he built the Autobahn. Not all tyrants do tyrant stuff all the time. Sometimes they do decent stuff. Maybe for selfish reasons, they promote somebody like King Henry II promoted Becket, thinking he would, he used to party with him all the time and go about doing evil. And he thought, I'll make him the Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, the guy took it seriously. I mean, that's like me. I mean, I should be a criminal and whatnot. But somehow something got a hold of me, and I changed. Well, then he had to kill Becket. And he had him killed. The king just ordered him. I don't like the way he's not cheating the way I want him to cheat. And I'm just going to kill him. And so he killed him. And you know what? The guy died and became a martyr. And all the church and all the people, this was their archbishop. Oh my gosh. And the Pope himself. I mean, everybody was ticked off. So Henry had to go and do penance. He had to bow himself and humble himself and admit that Thomas was a good guy and he, the king, was a bad boy. Well, praise God. You see how God works out, even with evil people, his good things, because God is supreme. 17, the nature of our submission to civil authority is not unlimited. You're not to obey everything, but refers only to matters temporal and external, never to matters eternal, touching our sacred consciences. And only such matters, even if they be temporal and external, only such matters as are proper to the civil law, such as are derivative of and agreeable to God's natural law of reason and justice. Never in violation of God's revealed law. It's a powerful sentence. You need to read it over about 5-10 times. 18, our natural liberty is the result of our natural duty, which we owe to God. You only have a liberty to do that which is right, which is your duty, and to no other. We owe that to God and to no other. You have a natural duty that you owe to God and not to anyone else. That's your liberty. We have a right to do what we have a duty to do. So a duty creates a right, and a right necessitates a liberty. And no one can take it from you because it's natural, immutable, fixed, and can never be changed, modified, or altered. That's natural. Natural is perfect. Even though it's perfect in concept, it's also perfect in truth in heaven. The natural law for this world is actually based upon the truth in heaven. In heaven, there is no evil done. Everything in heaven is just. Everything in heaven is wonderful. It's perfect. So God will never give an unjust judgment to anybody. All of his judgments are just. Now, that's the pattern for this world, and that's normative, which means axiological valued. That's the value. That's the moral value. That's that's what makes it right versus wrong. That's what makes it true versus false, and so on. So that's written into the universe. It's written in your soul. It's written in your conscience. It's written in your reason. It's written in justice itself. You can't get away from it or escape it, though men do all the time and want to. This natural right, 19, to do our natural duty is the limit on civil government, all human civil authority and power. All human civil authority and power is limited by your natural duty, rights, and liberty. You have duty that you owe to God. You have a duty that you owe to your neighbor. Then you have a right to do what you owe. And then you have a liberty to do what you have a right to do. Who will give you that liberty? Not a tyrant. He won't give you the liberty. He'll tell you to obey him rather than God. But you are self-governing, and you would rather suffer and do the right than to be blessed and promoted by doing the wrong. Is that not true? Oh, I'm telling you, this is so big. This is so huge. That's why if you don't rule yourself, you can't rule your family. If you don't rule your family, you can't rule the church. If you can't rule in the church, you'll never rule in the world. You can have power, but you won't have authority. 20, a king who violates this natural right violates our natural liberty and is no king at all, George III, and has no authority to command us to disobey God and obey him instead. Here's what the Bible says of such a king. It's better to obey God than man. I'm going to obey God in the place of man. Why? Because man is subject to God, and therefore you, being a king, have no authority, no power. You can have it, but it's illegitimate power because you don't have any right. You have no title. You have no deserving. You don't deserve to be a king. And that's what they said of King George. George, you have broken your covenant, your contract that you wrote with us, and we agreed to. You were to protect us if we obeyed you. We obeyed, but you didn't protect. Therefore, you are no longer king. You have breached, and therefore, we will rebel to keep the law. We don't rebel against you. We don't rebel against the office. We rebel against the abuse of that office. And they listed them in the Declaration of Independence, one after another after another. This is why you're a tyrant. This is why we're not against Parliament. We're not against England. We're not against the Constitution of England. We are against you personally because you have breached your office. You are unworthy of the office and the trust to which you were charged. Oh, I tell you, it's powerful. James Otis argued that way in his famous paper long before the Declaration of Independence. You should read James. And his sister, he had a sister named Mercy. Oh, she's good too. She's one of the brightest women. Sharp, so sharp. She married Warren, another bright guy. Famous family, powerful. Where am I? 20. A king who violates this natural right violates our natural liberty and is no king at all and has no authority to command us to disobey God and to obey him instead. All civil governments are thus limited by God and nature. A king or a civil ruler who refuses to be limited is a tyrant. Every man has a natural right indefeasible right, unchallengeable, unquestioned right, fixed and immutable right to obey God, to worship God, to do him obeisance, to serve him according to the dictates of his own natural conscience. Let's say a man worships a stick. Well, he has a right to do it if he thinks the stick is God. He has a right to do it. Even God won't take away that right. But he tells him that's wrong. That's why he came down into the earth. He didn't just stay up in heaven. Came down to the earth and said, hey, that's not reasonable. That's not right. Here's what's right. And that's why Moses had to tell that story. But first of all, he had to get it to the Jewish people, which he never got it to. And even though they had some light, they didn't carry it to the full extent. And that's why Jesus had to come along later and say, what Moses was trying to tell you under the law, let me tell you under equity. And I will now keep the law that Moses preached to them, but they didn't keep. Everybody was a law breaker. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, including the people that knew the truth, but they didn't do the truth. Praise God, that's not us. Praise God, the minute we learn what the truth is, we do it. Amen? All right. 22. All men have a natural and indefeasible right. Means you can't defeat it. You can't defeat this right because we have a duty behind it. Duties create rights. Rights necessitate liberties. So that's the way it works. All men have a natural and indefeasible right to obey God and worship him according to their conscience, their own individual conscience. So everybody has that. You have a duty to do that. You also have a right to do that. And you also have a liberty to do it. And no one's going to stop you. So I want to study. Hey, what did God have in mind for politics? Because you know what? Maybe God still has a role. Maybe God still has a role. Maybe he wants something. Now, as I said, this does not affect the church. But the church may well affect the state. May well have something to do with it. Because after all, they have to deal with us sooner or later. And if the church is not a light, it's darkness, it won't have an effect. But if it is, it will have a big impact. So believe me, all the political stuff out there, all the economic stuff, all the social stuff, it's all religiously based. It doesn't matter whether you call yourself Buddhist or Hindu or atheist. It's religiously based. All the wars, everything is going on. So the Muslims, they understand that totally. They put religion right in the foundation of their government and their economy and everything else. And it doesn't matter whether it's reducible to something else. Religion is that's the motivation. That's the lingua franca of the universe today. And so, well, I tell you, religion never went out of business. Even in Russia, where I go, even in Russia, religion's big. It's huge. And it establishes all kinds of things, even though they had an atheist government. And the atheists are in government today. But the mafia runs the economy. But the church runs the society. It's very interesting. A complete chaos. So if you want something done, you have to go to the mafia. The government just writes papers and collects bribes and whatnot. And the church dominates all the other little churches. Like, they don't want any freedom of religion there. So you can go all over the whole Russian Empire and discover it's very oppressive. I mean, they kill. The people are killed because of it. So it's not a mild thing. Religion is alive and well. Even Gorbachev, first thing he did when he was, the very first thing he did. Does anyone know what the first thing he did when he got into office? I mean, the very first thing he did when he got into office. He made a visit to Rome, sat down with the Pope. That's the very first thing he did. These people are smart. They know what's going on. And if you want to get something done politically, you do it through economics. You want to get something done with the people, you got to go to the churches. That's the way the world works. So if you don't have a political base or a economic base or a religious base, you're not playing the game. So there's a huge game going on out there, and it's powerful. So now we know what God has given us, a right to obey him, and that's because we have a duty. 23, any ruler, government, or law that violates or abridges that natural right and liberty is not legitimate, possesses no authority from God. They can create their own, but it didn't come from God. And the Bible is very clear. There is no authority except from God. So even though you make it up, you don't have it. And God will not back it up. He will judge that system. It's better to obey God, 24, than man. In such cases, no man can serve two masters at the same time. You can't say, well, I'm going to obey God and the state. You can't. You may want that to be the case, but if the state becomes unlimited, if it becomes unjust, if it breaks its bounds, if it goes beyond where it was constitutionally conditioned, which it does all the time now, well, then you'll have to make a decision. Who are you going to obey? I'll die. I'll absolutely die before I'll render to Caesar something that belongs to God. If I rendered it to God, I'm not going to render it to Caesar. So I'll defy, and I already do this, I'll defy the state, and they can take me at any moment. I don't know why they haven't done it. Could it be that they know they're wrong? It doesn't make any difference to me. Take us, ruin it, destroy it, go for it. But they haven't acted yet for some reason. It's been 10 years, 11, 12, I don't know how long it's been, a long time. And they got all the resources and all the power and everything. Why won't they do it? Because they know this is a confusing area. And the average individual can't get away with it, but churches still can. Churches that are locked up, you know why they're all locked up? You know why all those pastors have suffered? Every single one of them. I've studied all their cases. It's all because they were part of the system. They were hypocrites. If you're going to pretend like you're part of the system, taking benefits and begging the government for something, and then you want to play a different game, forget it. You're a hypocrite. And they'll catch you. They'll never tell you why. They'll not catch you over the thing you're talking about. They'll catch you for the fact that you're just their creature. And they'll treat you as a creature. Well, we're Christians and we believe in God first, blah, blah, blah. That's just talk. Then why did you take out a 501c3? Why do you have a local tax exemption? Why did you want to get a state incorporation? Why are you playing this other game? If you're really God and God alone, you got to be God and God alone. It's obvious the state is your benefactor. It's obvious that you're taking benefits from the state. So you must be one of our creatures because we don't give to non-creatures. If churches knew that, they would definitely make decisions not to do so, but they're ignorant. So they have no idea why they locked up that pastor, why they charged that church $3 million and took away its $5 million facility. They don't know why. I know exactly why. It's as clear as can be. But if you don't know how the game is played, Bible, God set it up, and then state, they've set theirs up. It's very clear. If you're going to obey God, then pay the price and rejoice. It's not bad. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with sinning. There is something wrong with hiding it. If you're going to sin, no problem. He'll forgive you, so on. But you need to repent. You can't keep crazy by trying to do both at once. If you're sinning, stop. How many know that the Holy Spirit is working on you to purify? And how many know that you don't want to stop? You would like to do both, God and mammon, if you could, to have two masters. That's why God said, no, it isn't the state that's getting you, it's me. Because you have whored. You have harloted yourself. You're playing both games. You can't take one benefit. How many know the Bible says this? My God shall supply a whole bunch of your needs. A few of your needs. Most of your needs. 99% of your needs. No, it says all. Well, if that's true, then you can't take anything from the government, like a tax exemption. You can't take an exemption from them. That's a benefit. And they even say that. We gave you that, therefore you owe us. That's simple. If they're the master, you're the slave. Hey, by the way, where did the government get anything to benefit anyone by? Is that in the Constitution? I don't read anywhere where the government has any benefits. I don't read anywhere where the government even owns anything. How can you give away what you don't own? You're not hearing me. If you don't have it, you can't give it. So where did they get that? Did the sovereign people give them something that then they could dispose of? The only thing they were to do was protect us from the bad guys. That's in the Bible. And the only thing that the sovereign people who are under the Bible said was, we don't want you to do anything positive. We don't want a welfare state. We don't want, positive duties by the citizenry. The only reason we even pay taxes is because God tells us to, not because Caesar has a sword. It's because God tells us to, not by wrath and fear, but by conscience. So God says, render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Show me a coin. Oh, yeah, that's his picture. That's his little inscription on there. Okay, give it to him. That's his. If that belongs to him, if he made the thing, it belongs to him. But in our government, the people never did that. The people said, government shall be limited. And it's only to protect the good guys and kill off the bad guys, knock them down, and don't let them be lawless. So believe me, this is more spiritual than you can even imagine. If you want to study economy, you'll learn all about God. If you want to study society, you'll learn all about God. You want to study politics, you'll learn everything about God. God is involved in all of these things because he's the foundation. George Washington said that the surest props of political felicity, of all the habits and dispositions of mankind which produce that political felicity, religion and morals are the indispensable supports. That's the pillar upon which. And don't think, he said, that you could have morality without religion. That was the French. He's talking, it was in 1796 when he wrote that farewell address. He was talking about the French Revolution. It was in its heyday in that moment. Don't even for a moment suppose that refined minds, because you're educated and smart, can function without some fear of God. Because even our oaths, by which we adjudicate whether something is fair, unfair, just or unjust, right or wrong, in our courts of law are totally dependent upon the fact that a man swears to God, not to the people, not to the nation, not to the folk, no, to God. So the fear of God, in Washington's understanding, was indispensable. And the only way you could have political happiness or safety or felicity would be if it was built on those two props. And religion was bigger than morals. So those three duties, religious duty, moral duty, civil duty. Civil is the least, smallest. Civil is nothing more than a subset of moral. And moral is nothing more than a derivative or subset of religious. In other words, the first table totally controls the second table. First four commandments, those commandments, if you do those, you will do the second six. So the way that God has set up the universe is he's chief. He's the supreme guy. He's the authority above all authorities. So when you submit to a higher authority, you're not submitting to man. That's what Hitler used that. He said, Adolf Hitler was smart. He said, you Christians have to obey the Bible. It says in Romans 13, submit to the authorities that be, and all the powers that be are from God. That's me. So I can do anything I want to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. He was smart, and the people fell for that. Brilliant people, but they fell for the folly of nonsense because they couldn't interpret the scriptures themselves. They didn't know what the Greek said. They had no knowledge of what's really being said. They didn't even know the difference between power and authority. Exousia, that is authority. But the King James translated power. Submit to the higher powers. Well, that would be Adolf Hitler. No wonder the kings like that little interpretation. King James was really happy about that. Why? Because he didn't want people submitting just to the higher authorities, because that meant kings are under God. And therefore, if you submit to a king, you can't submit to a king who isn't first submitted to God. And if a king submits something to you to obey, but he is not himself submitted, you cannot submit to that without violating God. Powerful. Simple. So the people then were in a quandary, and the churches had difficult time figuring out confessionally, what shall we say to Adolf Hitler? Would it be right, as some said, to fight him with weapons that are carnal? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, another pastor named Niemöller, they had to wrestle with that, trying to figure it out. You know, is it right to kill a man like that who obviously is out to destroy our confessional church. And they wrestle with that deeply, and they made their decisions. But the truth is, they shouldn't even have been wrestling with that. The church itself was in great difficulty because they had been trained for years to be confused. They had already succumbed to Hegel. They had already succumbed to a whole new way of thinking. It wasn't that a pig is a pig and it's not a horse. That's Aristotelian logic. A equals A and it doesn't equal B. A thing is what it is and it's not what it's not. A thing cannot be its opposite. But under Hegel, everything can be synthesized because there's an essential unity beneath all of the universe, so that even A, thesis, can be put together with B, antithesis, which can be synthesized together. It's exactly what's taking place in your world today. Communism, capitalism, one's the thesis, the other's antithesis. Synthesize them together, you have the UN. I mean, the whole thing. Obama is trained. I was trained. I'm highly trained in this whole business of linguistic manipulation. In other words, a word is not what a word is. It's actually has all kinds of other meanings to it, deeper meanings, tricky meanings. So when you say people, you don't mean people. When you say democracy, you don't, people have no clue as to what anyone's saying. Language has now departed from us. And the only way you can get it back is to return to the scripture, where words that God uses are powerful words, but they don't mean anything to the world. We don't have anything in common today with the world that's out there. So when someone says greed, they don't know if that means self-interest or greed, because they can't distinguish those words anymore. So we've lost our ability to communicate. And when a politician says God, he doesn't mean God. He's just saying that to get votes. It didn't explain what he was talking about. And the people all thought, oh, he must be a good guy. he's just a politician. They always say, God bless America. So it doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't mean anything. The guy goes out and rapes afterward. And he goes out and, is just out for money and whatnot. What does that mean? It doesn't have any meaning. But people fall for it because people are naive. They're foolish. So one has to wake up, and without being in love with Jesus, it's going to be hard for you, because you're just subject then to every wind of doctrine that floats about out there. So God is saying here, any ruler, 23, government or law that violates or abridges that natural right of worship and that natural liberty is not legitimate and possesses no authority from God. It's better to obey God than man. In such cases, no man can serve two masters at the same time. If you're going to serve God, you have to serve him all the way, even if man opposes him. 25. When we want to choose between obeying a superior or an inferior, we must disobey the inferior as a tyrant in order to obey the superior as the highest authority in truth. So whether some tyrant can come along and say, look, God appointed me, even if I'm a tyrant, you have to put up with it. No, you don't. You don't have to put up with Pastor Jim because he's called pastor. I'm not a pastor because I have a title. I'm a pastor because I'm doing the work of a pastor. If I don't do the work of a pastor, no matter what my title is, I'm not a pastor. I might have the title, but I don't have the substance, the reality. If your husband isn't obeying God, you're not commanded. You are free. If he's obeying something else, you don't follow him. You cannot. So God has set it up that authority is not tyranny. There's no authority for tyranny. And so these are the things that mankind hasn't wrestled out and probably never will. There's always an ambiguity that's out there. But you can decide today. You must decide, how are you going to live? You're going to live justly? You'll have to pay for it. How many know that there's no way to take our country back without blood? You're not going to just take it back and they're just going to hand it to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't realize the people didn't want that. They don't care what the people think. We have referendum after referendum. People make themselves known clearly to whatever. Nobody cares. We have a platform here in Texas. Nobody reads it. None of the legislatures care about it. Even the ones that pretend to don't, because you'd never get anything done. They do what the lobbyists pay them to do. They do what the special interest, the very group they're not supposed to serve, is the group they do serve. The very people that they're supposed to serve, they don't serve. The ones they're not supposed to, they do. And people are aware of it, but it doesn't mean anything to them. They just go, well, I'll try better next time. Okay, praise the Lord. It's foolishness. Now, I don't speak from theory. I speak from 20 years of total involvement in the political process, deep involvement. And that's not theory to me. But I know all the theory. And I knew before I got in how corrupt and rotten it was. That didn't bother me. What bothered me was how foolish the people are. And when you tell people the truth, they don't care. They're not motivated. As long as they have their beer and their cheese and their television set and the garbage is picked up, pretty much they're okay. But you start taking away their cheese and their beer and their television set, you'll see people now will get all excited, but it'll be too late. By the time they take away all those things, you won't have any power left. The guns are next, Without the guns, they can't really pull it off. So they want your little guns. Now, you don't have the big ones, but they want the little ones so that you can't put up any resistance. I mean, after all, they're still mortals, and bullets do go through them. So they don't want you to have any kind of defense whatsoever. We don't just have the guns to shoot animals. That's what they'd like you to think. It's actually to defend yourself from your own government when it becomes a tyranny. Resistance is an American concept. It's not a big thing in the rest of the world. In the rest of the world, it's called quiet resignation. You just simply resign yourselves to bad deals. Only in America was it allowed. It's not allowed in Ireland. It's not allowed in other countries. They don't want guns. They don't just let the government have all the guns. Surely they'll be nice to us and protect us. Okay. Go for it. So Ireland is now exporting, mathematicians and stuff. They've lost their ability to defend themselves as a nation because they don't believe in that. Because people that have guns are bad people. So only here in Texas are people still bad and they enjoy it. We believe that you should shoot rabbits, but you also can shoot other things. People walk in your house or get on your property, shoot them. And you wouldn't even have those laws if it weren't for Texas. I'll just tell you right now, Utah and a few other states. Those laws are only there because certain people felt, hey, I have a natural right to defend myself against somebody who comes and attacks me. And so, religious people here put God and guns together. They do. That's why they hated that Sarah Palin. She frightened them to the core. And rightly so, if you're a liberal. If you're a liberal, you believe mankind is nice. But mankind isn't nice. The depth of mankind's capacity for folly and for evil is incredible. It hasn't changed, by the way. There's no difference between the ancient barbarian world and the present civilized world. Civilized people still are barbarian. I don't know if you've ever gotten married or if you've ever, dealt with a Christian car salesman. They're barbarians. So you need to realize that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. People still live in a state of nature. Right here in our city, there are people living in a state of nature. They're under no laws. They just do their own thing. There are all kinds of people that do not submit to any kind of rules or laws or anything else. And the government itself is lawless. The government itself does what it wishes. It's tied down to nothing. Rhetoric is only so that people are quieted, but the reality isn't there. Now, I'm not mad at all that. I'm just telling you that's the way it is. Everybody knows it, but nobody wants to say it. But God says it, and I say it. Jesus said, render to Caesar only that which belongs to Caesar, but render to God everything that belongs to God. So don't give Caesar what belongs to God. For example, worship. Obama, and I'm not personal at all, because he's probably a very nice guy. Obama let people worship him and didn't tell them that's stupid and stinks and stop it. He let them bawl and cry and so on because he wanted the vote. But he himself knows he's not a god. He even jokes about it. He knows that's stupid talk, but he let it happen. So he let people adulate him as though he were the savior to save all the victims of America. And that means all card holders who can't pay their credit card debt, all mortgage holders who can't pay their mortgage, all people that want their kids to go to school, but because you're black or brown or disadvantaged, whatever, you need to have help. Well, okay, you can build a government like that, but there's no constitution for it. The people that formed this nation years ago did not want that kind of government. They wanted government to stop bad guys and let people be free to govern themselves. Because you are ungovernable now you are being governed. And you will be more governed and more governed and more governed till you have no liberty at all. If that's your choice, so the gospel will also be unheard of. It'll be more and more difficult. And when you do obey, you'll have to pay dearly with your life. I'm willing to do it. I want to do it. I'm not afraid of it. But a lot of you will have difficulty, and the Bible calls that multitudes in the valley of decision. In other words, these are days not in which people like me, I'm not going to change. And the left, they're not going to change. We're the radicals. They're the extreme people. But the people in the middle, the moderates, the centrists, they're the ones that are having to decide, should we go this way or this way? We can't hold them together. And they're trying desperately to get along. Even Obama, I think he put John McCain on the team or Hillary or whatever. This guy's, let me gather all like people together. Come on, this is stupidity. We'll all come to a big consensus. We'll all talk and then we'll all agree on certain common things. Come on, this guy's a liar. I say that because I'm a liar. I know how to lie. I was trained in all this stuff. I know all those tricks and so on and so forth. How to manipulate people. It's a piece of cake. It's easy because people want to be slaves. They hate being free. Why? Because when you're free, you're responsible. And when you're responsible, you have to say you're guilty. But people would rather be victims. Well, I had no choice. The government made me do that, and so made me do that, and my husband made me do this, and my wife made me do this, and I made a bad decision, but, that was the way I was raised. It's not my fault. Well, I'm not like that. Everything I've done is my own fault. If you fail, I'll take the blame. If something goes wrong, I'll take all the responsibility. It's a different way of looking at life. I believe a man is free, and I believe there's a world out there that has real values in it, not ones that government gives you. But there is truth, there's right, there's wrong. The Nuremberg trials, when they brought all the Nazis to the trial, that's when they discovered that people were saying, well, he told me to do it. I was just doing what I was told. You have to obey. And the judges decided differently. No, you were guilty. You knew that was wrong. Yeah, but everybody was doing it. Yeah, but you knew it was wrong. And they fixed individual, personal responsibility on people that said, well, how can you go against your government? How can you fight City Hall? How can you beat the system that's out there? You have to go along. I would lose my job. My family would starve. That's why I did it. Yeah? Well, you're not answering to God then. You should suffer and trust in God. Where's your God? Admit you don't have one. The reason you did that is because you don't fear God. So that's why you have tyranny. And it doesn't going to just go away. You have to kill it and stop it. It will not just kind of, like Obama. Let's all talk. What's talk going to do? In the end, talk is not real politics. Are you following me? There are rogue nations out there. They don't care about talk. They just lie to you. And Obama's going to believe him. Well, he said peace in our time, or he said, we won't do that anymore. Or what? Golly, how stupid can you be? That person is lying. So we've lost our ability to think and to act. Now, as a Christian, I know you don't care about these big things, but they're every day in your papers. They're every day on the television set, and your children are listening to them. They're being brainwashed by all this stuff. Your grandchildren, you're responsible. So you need to decide what Jesus is saying and doing. I'm excited about it. I'm not at all depressed. I'm not at all unhappy, but I'm just telling you the truth. You've got to live in reality. In reality, mankind is not nice. You might want the world to be like it should be, it could be, it ought to be, but it ain't. So you got to live in the real world the way it is. And you make your decisions based upon God first, all mankind second, and third of all, my political, I owe the society not just to do everything I'm told, but to do that which is right. And to do that, I may have to suffer. Ronald Reagan was called great because he did not follow convention. He did not do what people say, well, you'll never be elected or you can't make it. And he said, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. He had principle, and he didn't vary from his principles. Now, he may have compromised here and there. I think he did. But basically, in general, that man was firm, and we recognized him as a leader. Obama is never going to be that leader. He wants to be, but he can never be that leader. George Bush certainly wasn't. George, even if he was right about what he did, he never sold the American people on what he was doing. They don't even know what the guy did. They called him a liar and so on. He never defended himself. He just said some cowboy type thing like, well, I think it'll work out. He never convinced his own people that what he was doing was right. He never said there really were weapons or something or whatever. He just never made a case, ever. That's amazing to me. And so you begin to wonder about your own people. I wonder if, something stupid going on here. Why doesn't the guy defend himself? Why doesn't he come out and say it? They picked off every one of his followers. Picked off Abraham off, picked off, Karl Rove, kicked off, Libby, all of them. He just went after everyone. Gonzalez, dozens of them, until he had nobody left to defend him. I'm surprised Cheney's still there. I don't know how that guy survived. There's something fishy going on. Because all those guys took the fall for him. This is not a good deal. So if you're self-governing, you care about those things because you're responsible, not just to go along with, but to question, to be critical, to examine it closely. Why? Because that's what you do. As a Christian, you always have to check to see whether it's lined up with God. I do. And I'll pay the price. I'll suffer, whatever. It's not scary to me. It's not frightening to me. It's a good thing. All right. 27. We cannot give an account to Caesar concerning matters that don't belong to his jurisdiction. Churches belong to God, not to Caesar. Did you hear what I just said? Churches. Now, they're talking about you as an individual. You as an individual belong to both. But as a church, the church is God's. And it's a Greek word that says ekkaleo, called out ones, or ecclesia. So the Roman Catholic Church has understood over all these years, we do not belong to this world. We may rule over it, but we're not going to be ruled under it. And they fought since 1075 when Hildebrand became the Pope. He said, I'm going to set it up where we're not part of the state or the empire or whatever. We're on top of it or we're equal to it, but we're going to be free from it. We're not going to let it dominate. And after him, the church actually dominated. And Innocent III was the apogee, the high point of Catholic hegemony. They were able to rule without anyone gainsaying, speaking against, or trespassing and injuring against what was said. But it wasn't shortly after that, King John and all that stuff, that again they began to lose their power. And kings began to insist upon that the church itself is corrupted, therefore it doesn't have any legitimacy to rule in our stuff. And we're not sure about their stuff. So they began to argue about that. But they have always then stood for the liberty of the church. That was the watchword of the 10th, 11th centuries. The watchword was, the church is under God. It belongs to God. It doesn't belong to man. Ecclesia, called out of this world. Out of this world means the world can't rule it because it's not a creature of the world. It's a creature of God. So if the church belongs to God, then it's his bride. How many know that brides belong to the husband? So if this is my bride, if this is my wife, you can't have her. You can't hold hands with her. You can't kiss her. And you can't sleep with her. She's mine. And God will defend his own. Now, if it's a harlot, he can't defend it. That's the problem with the church today, is the church has mingled with the world and God can't own it. So we need to repent. He will forgive. We need to repent of our harlotry and not be part of. You are in the world, but you are not part of. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. That's pretty clear. But nobody wants to know that because it has tremendous consequences. It puts you in conflict with ambitious people. 28. For this reason, all God's churches are free from Caesar's law. Whatever his laws are, they don't apply to his church. God's laws do. And they must not render to him, even in temporal matters or in matters eternal and spiritual. Why do I say that? Because there are some that play a game called, oh, that's a temporal matter. What in the church is temporal? Show me one scripture. There are none. Everything in the church, including this building, belongs to God. Not because we own it. That's not the issue. It's because we use it. So because you use it for holy purposes, this is not a building for a gymnasium or for, target practice. No, this is not a political, economic, social, worldly place. This is just for God's things. Whether we use it all the time or don't, that's our business. But everything here is dedicated to God. And I dedicate this building every year. January 1, every year, there's always a dozen or two people that come here. We dedicate the building, turn it over to God. You only have to do it once, but I do it every year as a teaching so that we're aware that this is not our building. This is God's, because we're God's creatures. And I'm not myself an individual person that belongs to myself. I belong to God. He bought me, he purchased me. And he's in charge of my life. He's in charge of my ministry, my everything that I do. So I owe him an account. Well, I take that very seriously. So I'll die over that. I will physically die over that. If somebody tries to take that away, I will resist. I don't have to take up a sword. I just simply refuse. And do what you want to do. I'm not scared. I am not frightened about consequences. Why? I have a God. Even if he doesn't come through for me, I don't care. I still trust him. Remember Job? Yea, though thou slay me, yet I will trust in the Lord. Well, you have to decide how you're going to do it. That's the way I do it. That's the way I do it. Is there anyone else here who's like me? I don't care. I'm going to obey God. My conscience is captive. That was Martin Luther's whole word before the emperor is, I don't care what the church says, and I don't care what the emperor says. I owe my first allegiance to God. And therefore, my conscience is captive. I will not go against sound reason unless you can give me sound reasons. I'm going to let the word of God determine my life. I can do no other. And so he stood there. And of course, he was an outlaw, and he should have been killed. And there's no reason why he wasn't killed, except that heaven intervened. And his elector, Frederick of Saxony, he protected him. He immediately went out and captured him as though he were a bandit. And then he ensconced him off and hid him away in the Wartburg. And there he was, translating the New Testament. He was Squire George from that moment on. He grew a big beard, and he looked the part. Now, Luther eventually came out of hiding and said, I don't want to hide. I don't need the emperor. I don't need Frederick or anybody else to protect me. I'm going to stand out there, and if I die, I die. I'm not scared. But he lived a ripe old age. He never did get killed. So that was God's grace. And what Germany gave to the world is totally, totally misunderstood today. It was the greatest thing that has happened. Powerful. He gave it its language, its concepts, and so on, and theological liberty. And they were former Roman Catholics. Those Roman Catholics are today acknowledged by the Roman Catholic Church as men of God. They're no longer seen as heretics and evil, wicked people. Some were, of course, but there are others that were not schismatics or just dividers. They were after truth, and today they're acknowledged to be true brothers. Perhaps a little bit wrong here and a little bit wrong there, but true brothers nonetheless. That is a powerful statement. So there's a richness to our heritage that somebody paid for and somebody risked their lives for. Thousands of people, but they were built over these subjects. 29. Individual Christians are subject to the civil ruler and his civil laws. Individual Christians, not churches. Individual Christians are subject. Hupotasso, they're subject to the civil ruler and his civil laws. Pay taxes, but just such as are lawfully due. But Christian churches are not subject to the civil authority. Not subject to the civil authority. They cannot pay taxes since they cannot owe any man anything, including Caesar. They're not part of his creaturehood. They owe everything to God, and they give everything to God. If a penny comes into this church, it goes to God. It doesn't go to me. It's not mine. I am not free to do what I want with it. None of it's mine or David's or anybody else's. It's not yours either. Once it's given to God, it only can go then for what God wants it to go for. And for that reason, I don't have a big salary and I don't want one. I have tried my best to cut it down, and I could cut it completely off even. So that's my desire, to burden the church in no way whatsoever. Not because of our size, just simply to prove that God can take care of his church and that his church is to serve him. So churches are free. They're under God. And if they are, he'll take care of them. Don't worry, when the big churches all collapse and fall, we won't. First of all, we can't because we're so small already. It's kind of hard to fall. So you don't have to worry about that. Nobody wants this ugly building and so on and so forth. It has no stained glass windows. Has no steeple. Has no cross on the wall. Doesn't have anything. All it has is a bunch of people and Jesus. So to me, that's everything. You see, that means a lot to me, is we're not offering any bowling alleys. We're not offering any extras. There's nothing but the truth. That will set you free. 30. Christians are free in their sacred consciences. So as individuals, you're subject to the civil ruler, but not in everything, only in some things. What is it you're free in? Well, for one thing, your conscience. And that's what Luther argued about. And individual self-government. So you're free there too. You're free to govern yourself. Why? Because you owe God some duties. And the government has no right to say, don't give to God what's his. They can say it, but I'm going to disobey. It's better to obey God than man. Families are free in their natural duties and occupations. Churches are free in their existence, in their worship, that's the blank, in their edification, and in their mission. Caesar can have no authority over any of those three natural governments: individual, church, and family. Because they must each give an account to God directly. They don't give an account to man. 31. These natural freedoms are the limit on all civil government and law. Freedom, civil, law. When Caesar restricts his authority, when Caesar limits his authority, when he restricts it to matters which do not seek to control or interfere with those natural rights and liberties, then he's legit. If Caesar will accept the fact that God is God and he's not, and take those three liberties, individual, families, church, those are outside of his realm. If he accepts that, then he's not a tyrant. He can charge all the taxes he wants and so on, as long as he doesn't interrupt those three. Those are the three that God will not give him. Anything else, if he's corrupt and so on, this really doesn't bother me all that much. I'm not bothered by people being lying and cheating and so on. It doesn't bother me. What bothers me is if he touches God's freedom that he gave to me, duty that he gave to me, to our people, to our families, to our churches, then that bothers me. The other stuff, that's normal. It's normal. I'm not at all surprised. And you know what? I believe the fault lies with the churches themselves. I believe if the churches had truly been churches, the government would be further limited. I don't even blame Caesar when he goes off the deep end. Poor Obama. He's looked at the inequities in the society and all of the poor people and so on. Well, they feel sorry for him. Well, if I don't believe him, but let's say I did. If I did, I still don't blame him. I blame the churches for failing, not the state for usurping and taking over. I don't blame the judges. I don't blame the executive branch. I don't blame the legislators. I do, but not really. They're just limited. But I tell you, the real problem is the church wasn't the church. And we ceased to be good. That's why we ceased to be great. Civil government. Did I finish 32? Did I? Rights and liberties? No. Okay, civil government 33. When it's true government given by God, has authority over its proper citizens, not somebody else. When it's the true government, it's given by God. It's a gift of God, and it has authority over its proper citizens to use its public power under the rule of law for the purpose of restraining and punishing evildoers. That is civil evildoers, not just any old evildoer, but those that break the civil laws. And of defending, this is what good government does, and promoting the righteous in their civil, moral, or spiritual righteousness. That's what good government does. Protects you. And we did have that for quite a while. But it's still there. Actually, it hasn't gone, but it's dwindling. And you see a lot of confusion. But the confusion lies not with the government, it lies with the people. It lies with the churches. Our own form of government, 34, was chosen by our founders to be a limited government, subject to God's revealed law and his natural law, and to defend every citizen in his natural rights and liberties. So those are all limits on Caesar. And if a government accepts that, it's a good government, even if it had flaws. It's a good government if it just accepts that. 35. When our civil government remains within those lawful limits, we give our consent. And we obey God thereby. When our civil government remains within the little boundaries that the people, the sovereign people, fixed for it. 36. When our civil government oversteps those lawful limits, then we refuse our consent. And if our lawful protests find no remedy, we declare that form of government to be tyrannical and independent of God's lawful authority. I think it says unlawful, but that's supposed to say lawful. They declare themselves free of the tyrant and independent of, independent of their unlawful authority. Okay. Now, George III, who was the king when Americans broke away from England, They didn't break away from the parliament. They said they were never under the parliament. They broke away from the tyranny of one man, the ruler, who had a contract with them, which said, a covenant or a charter, which said, you are free to do this and that and so on and so forth. And the king then withdrew it. No, they said, you can't unilaterally break the covenant because you said, if we do this, then you'll do that. You're breaking. We did our part. You're not doing your part. You breached. Therefore, we're not rebelling. You rebelled. We are free. Now, it's a funny way of arguing. Did you hear how I argued it? So they weren't rebellious colonies in their eyes, regardless of what really they thought. This is how they argued. Their legal argument was, we never broke away from you. You broke away from the British Constitution, and we followed it. We were the lawful ones. You, the king, breached your office. Therefore, we're no longer bound because you made a covenant with us. You made a contract with us. You made a charter. And we have all of our colonial charters, 13 colonial charters. Here they are. So the king himself, if you'll read the Declaration, has nothing about Parliament. Parliament plays a minor role, but it's not the Parliament they're breaking from, because they said the Parliament has no authority over us anyway. We've always governed ourselves here as part of our charter. It's like the free cities in Germany. There were certain cities that were exempt from the normal city control, and they were free cities. And those cities were the first to receive the Reformation. Why? Because they wanted expansion. They wanted to be even freer yet to do trading and to carry on their business. So they were not only open to financial freedom, they were also open to religious as well as intellectual. They wanted to discuss things openly. They didn't want to be controlled. So all governments that have been smart, even Rome, always allowed exceptions, always allowed peculiarities, so that they could govern in a way that would be roughly peaceable. It's only when you have a totalitarian government that insists that everybody march in this one direction. You can't force that. So laws should be limited. They can't be unlimited. Some arbitrary person just deciding, well, I want the whole nation to go like this, all in my favor. You can't do it. God didn't set up that kind of government. That's a tyranny. So you have a right to rebel against such a tyranny and say, no, we the people are bigger than the king. Even kings rule in the name of the people. Even Adolf Hitler, I'm sure he never claimed that I'm God. I'm sure he just simply said, I'm God over this people, and I'm going to do everything for their good. They put a moral picture to it. In other words, I rule in the name of the folk, or I rule in the name of the people, or I rule in the name of the nation, or whatever. But he himself was an instrument of that larger concept, which was just. That was the way he did it. When he wrote Mein Kampf, he was telling how he's going to rule and why he should rule. And a lot of people believed him. They thought, well, maybe he'll bring us out of our economic woes. How many know this political thing we just had was all about economy? It's all about, get us out of the Versailles Treaty junk. Why is the German nation, which is so powerful, why are we held back? Why are we restrained? How long should we be punished? It's getting to the point now where nothing is going to work. Phooey on that. And so we're going to start expanding our living room. We don't like to be restricted anymore. Can't move out of here and can't do this, can't do that. And so they began to spread out. But it started out as a good idea. Just let's be fair. There are German people living in Austria. There are, blah, blah, blah. And they began to just move out in what seemed to be legitimate ways. And everyone was kind of unclear. What right does this man have? And why would the industrialists support him? Why were whole swaths of the German people? Because they were people that knew they had a future and a destiny. And here they're trying to be restrained by just vengeful people. It's true, maybe Germany overstepped itself. Maybe it didn't. but the Versailles Treaty was unconscionably punishing, and it never ceased. It was getting worse and worse and worse. So somebody had to come along and do something. So that wasn't all bad. No, it's not right. You can't hold back an industrial, intelligent, hardworking people like that and have them pay forever. What kind of nonsense is that? Pay for the reparations, whatever, and then get on with it. But they wouldn't do it. And even to this day, they still fear Germany. Germany is still feared. They don't want to give them any kind of power. If they ever become militaristic again or powerful, they're afraid of them. So in the offing, they've become financially powerful. And they still are. So regardless of what you think. Things are, you can't hold people back. You've got to give them freedom. Maybe they'll make mistakes, but that's how you learn. How many know you learn by mistakes? You don't learn because you're brilliant. You learn because you're smart enough to realize that you're not that smart. And you learn by the mistakes you make. I will not do that again. That one didn't work. Profit and loss, right and wrong, bad consequences, good consequences, that's how you learn. And you make decisions, and everybody here makes decisions. Is there anyone here who has ever made a bad decision? Everybody. Everybody's made some bad decisions. You made some marital decisions. You made some financial decisions. You made some personal decisions. You made a lot of things that we're looking back at it now. It's like, well, that was foolish. I wasn't always wise. That's how you learn. That's where wisdom comes from. 30. Did I finish 36? We declare that form of governance to be tyrannical and having no God-given authority over us. 37, and I think I'll close with this. This is what our founding fathers did when King George broke the laws of the English Constitution. They chose, our founding fathers, to obey the higher authorities, like Scripture said, and they declared themselves free of the tyrant and independent of unlawful authority. Yeah, I did do that one. The next one, 38. This is what our state founders also did here in Texas when Santa Anna marched onto the soil of Texas to impose tyranny and lawlessness in violation of the rights and liberties of its citizens. Now remember, those Americans that were living here had a contract, a covenant with Mexico City. And Santa Anna just decided to arbitrarily come and just conquer them. Well, wait a minute, what about their rights and liberties? He's just going to trample on them. Because for his own reasons, he thought they're going to rebel against us or whatever. That's preemptive. He thought, well, I'll just go up there and I'll discipline them. I'll bring them into line. Well, the man overdid it. And so he underestimated the resistance that would come. He had thousands, 5,000 troops with him. So he's very disciplined. He had big armies. He could easily take the Americans. There's no way they could win. But he was wrong. They did win. How many know he had a few weaknesses? Tyrants always do. There's always something you hadn't calculated. But, we now believe that what he did was tyrannous. And that's what they believed at the time. And they lost at the Alamo and Goliad and other places. They lost. They weren't able to beat him. And they learned to retreat and retreat and retreat and retreat. How many know there's a strategy to retreating? Like save your life. The other guy's bigger than you are. But they eventually wore him down and his food supply. And eventually he relaxed and messed around and they caught him by surprise. Same as George Washington. Same as very many wise generals over the years that took advantage of their enemies' weaknesses. So you may not be strong, but you better be smart. If you lack something, you better have some strategy. Sometimes the weak aren't so weak. Depends on whether you have the wisdom of God and if you have the approbation of the rest of mankind. After all, the American nation, they weren't Americans. They might have been formerly American citizens, but they gave that up and became part of the Mexican nation to get the free land. How many know that there's a little free land there was offered, not all free, but very inexpensive. And so then they fought, and they eventually won, and they were promised land. That was one of their pay. Their paycheck was not any currency. Their paycheck was, you'll get 1,280. We're on Sarah Jennings' piece of property right here. Jennings Avenue is just right over there. This was Sarah's 1,280 acres. She had a ton of property because she got not only from her husband, first one, but she also got from her second one. First one died, so she got all his, and then the second one, so she's a pretty clever little girl, and she advanced herself. So we're living on her property, and we have now assumed her position. So everything on this little piece of property right here, we claim it as though we were exactly her. Because in the eyes of the law, we are. So those kind of things are interesting and powerful. All human laws, 39, powers, authorities must first be subject to God and to his higher laws and authority before we can consent and obey. So everything human has to be under God, and then we consent. 40. Every civil law that commands our attention must first be subject to and conformable to the higher authority of God's revealed, and natural law. 41. Our system of civil law requires that before any sort of power is taken out of its sheath, is applied by the public power, it must first pass 7 laws above it. In our form of government, here in America, here in Texas, before the policeman can take out his gun, before the judge can make a ruling, before the executive branch can make any decision, before the legislatures can pass a law, these 7 higher laws must first be dealt with. Here they are. Number 1, or A, God's revealed law. Though there's nothing direct about this, it's indirect, and it's acknowledged indirectly that Christians have a right to obey the revealed law of God as set forth in their Bible. B, his natural law, God's natural law. C, English common law, which we derived from the Scandinavian and Germanic Saxon people who practiced liberty from the beginning, going way back in Germanic time. The Germans never had kings that were unlimited. Those kings were always limited, and they served the people. That's where we get the idea. The idea did not come from, kings being almighty. It came from the fact that the Germans took care of the folk, the people. And the folk and the people were the reason why he went to war, or the reason why they made the rules they made. He never made arbitrary rules. That came later. That was borrowed. So English common law was adapted by the colonists without the feudal incidents. I could name them all, but it's not important. So basically, they adopted the common law in 1776 as they adopted it. They adapted it and adopted it. D, the law of the land, which was established by the sovereign people. In other words, what's going to be the basic law of this land? And whoever steps first on soil can set the law of that land if he colonizes it. Whoever is the first one to set a foot on the soil. Cabot did it, and he did it for Henry VII, Henry VIII's dad, just before the turn of the century. Luther was about 10 years old. maybe a little older than that, 15, about that time. So just at that time, it could have been Columbus in 1492, but in fact, it was a little later or a little earlier that an Englishman stepped on it, and Columbus never did step on American soil. He followed the birds. You remember he was almost coming to the American soil. He didn't know where the land was, but he knew there was birds up in the sky, and he saw the birds flying south. So he turned his boat, and instead of hitting, one of the Carolinas or Florida, he instead went down and hit one of the Caribbean nations. That's where he did all of his work, and he thought that was the New World. So that was why it happened. And so we would have been a Roman Catholic nation, but instead, because of Henry VIII, who changed the religion and decided to be Protestant, but not in form. He was Roman Catholic in form, but Protestant in theology, only because he had so many wives that he kept trying to get a son out of. And, the Pope wasn't allowing him to do whatever he wanted to do, but he didn't care. This was the days when kings wanted all the authority and power, and they didn't want to be told by anybody what to do. Anyway, that's the law of the land. So the law of this land is something that the sovereign people have to establish. And here's some of the things they did to establish that. E, the Declaration of Independence, 1776. Then the original state constitutions at the time of the Union. Then the United States Constitution of 1787. And then the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments of 1791. Now, these 7 laws are higher than any law that the general powers of government can enact or promulgate, whether it's a local municipal ordinance, whether it's a state statute, or whether it's a federal law. They must pass muster before they become law by agreeing to these higher laws. So lawyers today and judges today ignore the higher laws. They just ignore them. But I want you to know something. For 200 years in this country, they did not. It's only of late that they've become so arrogant that they can ignore God and his higher laws. And the Supreme Court today doesn't really care what the Constitution says. Does not. It uses the Constitution as an evolving document that they alone can interpret. It no longer is controlled by, but they control it through their interpretations. And so the executive branch is happy about that because then they can do what they want. The legislatures can make any laws they want, and those will be the laws that the judges will interpret and the executive will apply against you without reference to higher law or equity. That's why the Bible says judgment must not just be judgment, it must be just judgment, right judgment. So, in every nation now, you have what's called code law. That is law made by men, without reference or appeal to anything higher than the code. Whether it's the Napoleonic Code or the code in Louisiana or whatever code that a nation will come up with. And even America has a developed code now. There's all kinds of codes that are, the IRS has a code. It's not law, it's a code. That means it's very minute. It takes every case and says, if this, then that. If this, then that. Going all the way back to the earliest laws of mankind, like the law of Hammurabi. In Hammurabi it said, if your ox gores my ox, then your ox belongs to me. Simple. If then, if then, if then, if then. If you meet these, particularly if your case fits these parameters, if you're premised upon these parameters, the conclusion must be this law will punish you to this extent. So, if you take out an eye, you get an eye. That's the law of the jungle. But sometimes, if you do this, you pay back fourfold. It's a different law. So, and I've lived in countries where They just kill you right on the street. And you just drive by and it's typical. It's common. You just see crowds of people, they're probably killing somebody. And I've seen it with my own eyes many times. And you can be killed at any time for any reason. There are many countries where law there is no law. It's lawless. And the policeman can just stop you and rob you, or citizens can just stop you and rob you. And there are no policemen. Many countries in the world have almost no policemen anywhere except in the major cities sometimes. And even there, I'm telling you, it's just lawless. You just drive anywhere you want to drive, and you drive whatever speed you want to drive. And India, it's just a wild place. Africa, you just drive up on people's property or whatever. You just drive where you want to drive. The streets are full of potholes and so on and so forth. It's not even safe to drive on the streets. You sometimes have to drive up on the lawns and stuff. Crazy. So, you see, laws only work if you're lawful. These 7 higher laws are established to keep our laws legal and lawful. Otherwise, though they may be legal, they are not lawful. Lawful is higher than legal. When properly administered, 42, our plan of civil governance forms a God-given bulwark against tyranny and injustice. When properly administered, our plan of civil governance forms a God-given bulwark against tyranny and injustice, in defense of all of our individual and family rights and liberties. That's our form. Those are things that count with us. It's not true in every country. 43, the public power has 4 uses. First, to restrain the wicked and defend the righteous. Or put in another way, to punish the wicked and commend the righteous. So, that's basically what government's all about. Stop the bad guy, leave the good guy alone, which is another way of saying protect him. 44. We do well to ponder what George Washington said in his farewell address in 1770. This is the wrong date. It's not 1776, it's 1796, just at the time of the terror in France. And his words relate to the French Revolution. So exactly at the time when the Americans were discovering what form of government and how they should minister that, the French were also deciding what form of government they should have and how they should minister it. And here is the contrast. George Washington, 1796. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity. In other words, if you want to know what makes political justice a good government, of all the habits and dispositions, these 2, religion and morality, are indispensable supports. So, following the Good Reformation, following the Roman Catholic Revolution in the Middle Ages, and following the biblical tradition and the tradition of the fathers, these men set out, George Washington said, what we've learned from history is that the best political house is founded on 2 things. First, religion. Second, morality. They are the indispensable supports. You can't have it without them. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriot who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. In other words, if you want to be happy, your government has to be founded on religion and morality. Those are 2 natural things. These firmest props of the duties of men and of citizens, let it be simply asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in the courts of justice. In other words, if a judge cannot depend upon the witness telling the truth, and the only way he could tell the truth is to swear to Almighty God and to be a moral man. How can an atheist, and an atheist could not even come into court. And if you were an atheist, you could not have standing in any court. So the Americans, today that's not true. Today atheists have all kinds of standing. Today all kinds of perversions and so on are allowed. There's no more sanity to our nation now. We are not a nation of wise and virtuous people. We are now a foolish people who are spread wide, who have no more boundaries. We have no more markings. Anything goes. But Washington said, the government we set up is for a moral people, a religious people. And if you don't have that, you cannot have a political house. And we are right in that position now. That's why you don't have political sanity. You have a surreal world. I hope you're happy about that, because that's the world you have right now. Because you were watching television. You were, not serving God, because God wanted you to have not only a religious duty and a moral duty, but also a civil duty. And if you let it go and said, well, you don't have time. Well, you should have had time. You should realize that it's part of your religious duty to have a political duty, a civil duty. You owe the world something, to be salt and light, even if indirect. Still powerful influence on this world. And I have been chastened by God to do such a thing and to have such a care. It's part of my love, faith active in love. I don't just have faith, I have faith active in love. I care. Even if the person goes to hell, I still care for this world. Just because a person's going to hell someday because of their rotten faith or something, doesn't mean I have to hate them and don't love them. I'm still bound to love them and care for them. Jesus did not hate Pilate. He did not hate Herod. He did not hate anybody. He would that all men be saved. That was his desire. He came, for God so loved the world, not just the church. He loved the whole world. He hate what they did, but he loved them. And thank God for that, for me. And let us with caution, George Washington says, 44, last couple sentences, indulge the supposition that morality could be maintained without religion. You can't have morality if you don't have religion. If you don't have religion in your foundation as a political house, you're not going to have morality. So idolatry produces immorality, produces injustice. Whereas true religion produces morality, produces justice. Two different systems. George is very clear. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. He was referring to the French. The French were saying, we have overthrown now the monarch and the church, particularly the Roman Catholic Church they were after. And by overthrowing religion, they substituted for it the goddess of reason and marched her through the city of Paris. And they worshiped and sang paeans to a statue, a goddess, the goddess of reason. What foolishness. That's what he's talking about. These learned people in France, they weren't stupid people. And it wasn't that the Ancien Regime was a good regime. No, it had many bad things to it. If you've read anything about the French Revolution, it was terrible. Charles Dickens wrote a story called A Tale of Two Cities. The two cities were London and Paris. And he said it was the best of times and the worst of times. Well, most times are like that. You'll find if you look closely, most times are best and worst. But George said this, whenever or whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, in other words, if you're brilliant, if you're smart, if you're clever, both reason and experience forbid us to expect that national morality will ever prevail in the exclusion of religious principle. You cannot have morals once you turn away from God. So the foundation of our educational system in this country used to be religious. The Bible was memorized, it was taught, it was on the bench of the judge. No longer. Now religion is out of everything. And it's only in the churches. It's just left in these little buildings, hither and there. Well, it doesn't bother me. I'm not limited at all. But you cannot throw religion away. And you'll taste the bitter fruit of that, which we are tasting, and we will taste it some more until we repent. And if we don't repent, the Lord will return, take his bride, and the world will decay. So he's calling us to repent. A revival means you better talk to your neighbors. And that means you better have some truth yourself. And that means your family needs to be in order, because they'll call you a hypocrite if it isn't. And you better have joy and power. And the kingdom of God better be in evidence among you. That's my task. I'm not blaming you. I'm saying it's my task to have that happen. I've been sent by God to make sure that happens. Well, I don't have any power. I have no power but preaching and teaching in my own life. That's all I have. I don't have any authority otherwise. 45. Washington cared more for the liberty than for any other prize. Here's what he said. If I could have entertained the slightest apprehension that the Constitution framed in the convention, where I had the honor to preside, might possibly endanger the religious rights of any ecclesiastical society. If I thought that the Constitution in any way would threaten religious rights, certainly I would never have placed my signature to it. So he's saying liberty is number one. And if I could now conceive that the general government might ever be so administered as to render the liberty of conscience insecure. So he said, I didn't do it then, and I would never do it. And now he's retiring, by the way. This is his farewell address. He's saying goodbye to everybody. He's saying, I'm out of politics now. I'm going to retire. But here's what he said. Whatever may be conceded about all those things, I tell you, religion is critical. And now he's saying, if somebody's conscience, the liberty of conscience, was rendered insecure, I beg you, 45, be persuaded that no one would be more zealous than myself to establish effectual barriers against the horror of spiritual tyranny and every species of religious persecution. So George was not for the French Revolution, nor for any other utopian idea. He was for religious freedom. He hated persecution. General 46, General George Washington, as a general, fought in the Revolutionary War against the unjust civil government of the King of England. But his real motives were positive, not negative. The establishment of civil and religious liberty was the motive which induced me to the field. The only reason I became a general, the only reason that I took that job, the only reason I engaged in my military exploits was to defend two things, civil and religious liberty. And religious liberty is the key, the foundation of all civil. Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration, said, our civil rulers can have no authority over such natural rights. Our civil rulers can have no authority over such natural rights, only as we have submitted to them. In other words, they have authority only over what we gave them, but they don't have any authority over natural things, which we didn't give them. The rights of conscience we never submitted. Remember when Luther stood before the emperor, he said, if you can convince me by sound reason or by clear scripture, then my conscience is bound. I will obey. But if not, I will never obey. I would die first. So help me God, I can do no other. Well, that was a powerful statement, that he defied even Caesar, because Caesar was doing something that he had no right to do. That's all. He wasn't defying Caesar, he was defying a tyrant. And that's a whole nother story. We could not submit, Jefferson said, for we are answerable for them to God. Here's Thomas Jefferson. Many believe he's an atheist. Here's what he's saying. No, we answer for our natural rights to the God of nature. But he doesn't even say that. He just says God. And he ran to become president when people were calling him an atheist. Was he an atheist? Well, God knows. But I'm telling you something, he didn't conceive of himself as one. Did he believe the Bible as we do? No. He messed up the Bible, cut most of it out, took out all the miracles, took out all the supernatural, just kept the only thing he kept in religion was morals. And remember, George Washington said, if you don't have any religion, you don't have any morals. So Thomas Jefferson was reducing his religion just to morals. But at least he called himself religious. And I believe him. I personally believe that Jefferson meant this. I do not believe he was playing a trick. The legitimate powers of government extend only to such acts as injure others. So the legitimate, any other kind of government, it's not legitimate. It only extends, it doesn't extend to God. It doesn't extend to conscience. It doesn't extend to nature. It only extends to civil injuries that one does to another. That's all. These are strong statements by very brilliant, intelligent, but also, I believe, virtuous men. The last one, James Madison, 48. The prime author of our Constitution. He wrote, we hold it for a fundamental and undeniable truth that religion, or the duty which we owe to our Creator, and the manner of discharging it, can be directed only by reason and conviction. Only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. The religion then of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man. And it is the right of every man to exercise it as these may dictate. In other words, your reason, your conviction. That's your own. Government can't touch that, must not touch that, can never touch that. Not in the American form of government. In other forms, religion is always messed with. This right is in its nature an unalienable right. Inalienable. Unalienable. You can't alien it. You can't sell it. You can't barter it. You can't give it away. God gave it to you. You can't get rid of it. You have liberty whether you like it or not. Even if you become a slave, you still have the liberty. God gave it to you. Use it. Maybe you suffer. Too bad. He gave it to you. You're going to answer to him for it. 49. It is unalienable because the opinions of men, depending only on the evidence contemplated by their own minds, cannot follow the dictates of other men. In other words, if I have an opinion, that's my opinion. It's part of my property. I own it. And it doesn't matter what other people have an opinion about. I have opinions that are not like other people's. But it doesn't matter. That's my opinion. And therefore, I do not submit that, nor will any government make me not believe what I believe or say what I say. I have freedom. That wasn't given to me by the government. It was given to me by God and by nature. It is unalienable also because what is here a right toward men is a duty toward God. What is a right toward men is a duty to God. So if God gives me a duty, Jim, you worship me according to the dictates of your own conscience, and somebody tries to interrupt that, no, I have a right. Maybe I don't have a liberty, but I have a right. But if I have a duty, then I have a right, and then I have a liberty that God gave me, even if I have to suffer. And I will suffer for it. I do suffer for it. And I gladly do. I'm not even mad at the people that caused me suffering. I'm witnessing to them. It's a wonderful opportunity to be hated. I've stood up many, many times against thousands of people gathered against me, and I was the only one. Stood alone. Institutions do not, I'm not afraid of them. They're afraid of me. And I'm telling you, when you believe something strongly, your father knows that. You remember you telling me about your father down in your country, how he witnessed and shared? People hate you then. So what? The truth is greater than lies. Light is greater than darkness. Love is greater than hatred. You just endure. You suffer and you rejoice in your sufferings. You might be imprisoned. You might be hated. You might have a knife to your throat. All these kind of things. It's all right. I was ostracized and so on. It's nothing. I'm not going to say what God gave me is nothing. If God gives me an opinion, it's my opinion. It may be wrong, but then you have to convince me, because I only go by my own reason and my own conviction. So Madison is saying this is the foundation of our government. It has to do with self-governing people, not with some majesty on high that tells me what to do, just a mere man. They have to be subject to fear of God. They have to be subject to the higher laws. And so if they don't want to, then they're unjust. And I'm not afraid of that. I'm not afraid of being killed. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm not afraid of suffering. It is the duty of every man to render to the Creator such homage and such only as he believes to be acceptable to him. And this duty is precedent both in order of time and in degree of obligation to the claims of civil society. In other words, the political government is not above my personal homage to God, my worship to God, my conscience, my opinions, my capacity to express myself, and so on. Civil government cannot take those away from me. They didn't give them to me. They can't take them from me. God gave them to me, and no one can take them. And I'll suffer before I'll submit to any civil society, which I would not call a civil society. Before any man can be considered a member of the civil society, he must first, this is Madison, be considered as a subject of the governor of the universe. Amazing statement. These are quotes. I'm just showing you that what the Bible teaches, the founding fathers also believed and submitted to, which is no longer the case. This is gone now. All these things that I'm reading you is mere history. We maintain, however, it's not for me. For me, I still believe these things, and I hope so for you. We maintain that, therefore, in matters of religion, no man's right is abridged by the institution of civil society. In matters of religion, religion is not subject to civil society. No man's individual, and certainly no church, can be ruled over by the state. And that religion is wholly exempt. Religion is wholly exempt. That means accepted out. That means not included in. That means left alone. That means separated from. That means the general powers of government cannot reach or touch or define or in any way command or demand or trammel upon or in any way condition that which we owe only to God. Render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but render to God what belongs to God. It's better to obey God than man. Wholly exempt from its cognizance. That means legal cognizance in a court of law or a policeman or anyone who's involved in the general government can never take cognizance of things that are religious. If they do, they are playing God and they are no longer just in our form of government. And even though in practice people despise these words now and do not regard them, de jure, they're still the law in our form of government. In other words, they've never been overthrown. So even though in practice, de facto, they are no longer regarded. Once the legislators and the senators in our state party, we said to them, look, Here's all these platform things that we've put forth as people. These things count to us. Why don't you write them into law? And they say, and they just told us flat, we don't even read what you write. We don't even care what you write. We don't care what the people think. We do what we wish to do. You elected us, too bad for you. Well, there you had it. So our whole job was worthless, had no meaning to them. And that's true the world over. The public opinion is nothing until it becomes angry. That's the only time they listen. When they get thousands and thousands of phone calls and letters, that and they respond. Otherwise, they don't, because they don't want to be voted out. Religion is wholly exempt from its cognizance. There is not a shadow of right in the general government to intermeddle with religion. There is not a shadow of right in the general government to intermeddle with religion. There is not a shadow of right in the general government to intermeddle with religion. These are powerful statements. And I hope you're informed today, not only biblically, but particularly in terms of our own form of government, because the whole world right now is wrestling with these things. The whole world is now wrestling. Don't think the economy is anything. Don't think politics is anything. Don't think that the society is anything. The first thing is to settle the first thing. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. I'll give you everything else. Do you know if we return to God, like the Pope said, if you return to God, if you return to spiritual things, then God will grant you political, economic, and social things. That's the trouble in our world today. I look forward to a revival, but I don't know that it'll happen. But it could happen among you. I don't wait for it to happen in the bigger society. You start. Individuals, families, churches. That's where the revolution always begins. I'm excited. The best is yet to come. I believe the best has been saved to the last. And I believe it's time to teach those things before you lose them. Before everything falls apart. Before everything goes down the drain. Because without a vision, the people perish. For lack of knowledge, my people are destroyed. Knowledge from God is the most precious gift. That's why the Bible has been given to you. And that's why I was sent, to help you understand that Bible, not to tell you what it says, but to teach you how to read it for yourself, so that with your own reason, your own conviction, your own conscience, your own faith, you can take a hold of these things and then spread the kingdom message to all. So, hope you enjoyed the lesson today. Amen. Amen.
Yeah. No man can do what's already